the gamblers are pretty neat because this is their biggest pro about this, is that they will take a long shot if they think it'll work for that one. The biggest con about that is they will take a long shot if it thinks it's going to work out for them.
Having been your game master many times, Leo, let me correct you. They will take a long shot even if there's no chance it will benefit them.
That's me.
I've seen you many times do something that I have explicitly told you won't work because you thought I meant I have a 1,000 chance.
So there's still a chance.
But I heard there was a chance, though, right? Just a reminder, this is a spoiler-heavy podcast. Different series that require a spoiler warning will be in the description. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Gaming Theater Podcast. Today's episode is going to be a special episode about Game Mastering 202, interacting with player types. With that being said, I've got several guests here that are game masters in their own right and also have played many games, and they will be joining us and describing and helping us out with this topic today. Now, with this, once again, my name is Leo. I am the Geek Scorpio, and I am your host this evening. Now, over to my right is going to be...
Hi, I'm Rob. I am a student of game design.
All right. And with that, over to their right is going to be...
What's up, GTP Nation? It's me, your boy, DandDaine, spelled kind of funny. You've probably heard my voice on other GTP products or podcasts before. If not, you're in for a treat. I am an award-winning dungeon master. I am a game designer of sorts myself, and I do money for charity on Twitch and other places on the internet, so come find me. Or else.
All right. And with that, and over to their right is going to be...
Hey, I'm Dicey Vim. I'm a Twitch streamer, and I also post videos on TikTok. Sorry. Very nervous and excited to be here with the GTP crew. I am a game designer, tabletop RPG writer, and just love gaming. So can't wait to talk games with these guys.
All right. And with that being said, let's take a quick trip over to the Magical Merch booth.
Whee!
La, 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 la.
Here we are on the Magical Merch booth, and today's Magical Merch booth is going to be a little bit special, and we've had DandDaine to tell us a bit more about it.
Hello, my name's DandDaine. If you don't know me, I do stream on Twitch, as you may have heard earlier or not. I don't know when this is going to be in the episode. Maybe it's before. If you're learning now, I stream on Twitch. But one thing I do every year is I stream and run games for Extra Life, the Children's Miracle Network Hospital's charity event. Extra Life is a really awesome event. It raises money to help sick kids, and it's a cause that is very near and dear to me as a former sick kid. So yeah, if you are interested in learning more, you can go to extra-life.org. If you just type in Extra Life, you'll find it into Google. And you can help other people start raising money to help sick kids in your area. What's nice about it, one thing that I really do enjoy about it, is that all the proceeds for that streamer or that event runner go to their local Children's Miracle Network hospitals. So if you're like, oh, I would donate to you, DandDaine, but I live in New Jersey and, I don't know what it's going to help sick kids, which is a good thing, but it's not going to help sick kids in my area. Well, you can find somebody else who is doing an event or run an event yourself for your area that will link up with your own Children's Miracle Network hospital. So if that's your jam, come check it out and come find me in the end of November doing a 24-hour stream for Extra Life.
And unlike last year, we're not having DandDaine do an episode of the podcast right after a 24-hour stream.
That could be fun. I'm down.
That'd be fun.
Let's do one during the stream this time, maybe.
Maybe. I'm not saying no. I'll put that out there. But I understand if you're like, maybe I should sleep. 24, 48 hours. What's the worst on that, please?
I mean, I once was awake for cumulatively 3 days, and that sucked.
I believe after 4 days, you can be counted as clinically insane.
I started to hallucinate at 3, which was not great. 0 out of 10. Don't recommend.
Yeah, don't recommend on that one. But yeah, when the state stream is coming and any of our charity streams are happening with members of GTP, you will get announced for that, and I'll be promoting them throughout all of our social networks on there. That being said, let's go ahead and get back to the show. So on today's episode, what we're talking about is Game Mastering 202 and interacting with your player types, which is the title of this episode. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because it's a subject that was, for those who, let me rephrase it. So for those who have been keeping up with GTP, there was an episode that was done, I want to say last year or the year before that. I think it was season 2 or season 1. I forget. I want to say season 2. But what it is that was an episode with me, Rob, and Dane talking about Game Mastering 101, how to get into game mastering. And game mastering and for TTRPGs, there's ways that you can approach it, and it's very doable for anybody on there if you're willing to do a little bit of extra work for that. Now, there's another aspect to that, which is the players who play the game itself. Now, if you're wondering, I have a bunch of different players, and every player out there has a different play style and different ways that they enjoy to play. We talked about this before, that a good thing to start with is a session 0, if you can, so you can find out, what the players want for your game mastering or what kind of game that you should be playing. Now, that's not the only way to approach this. There's still a couple of different ways to do this. So what we're going to break down is sort of different archetypes of players. We're not going to hit all of them. There is literally thousands of them. Some of them have been played for laughs as jokes from different game masters who others have been like experiences from game masters and stories that they've told about, hey, I have this player and they are doing these things, and that's weird. And there's ways to curtail your game. If you're a good enough game master, you should, even if you are surprised, you can still run with the punches on this one.
Really quick, just as a quick note, because I know you and I know the meaning of your words, but just so you're aware, if you can't do that, it doesn't make you a bad dungeon master or a game master. Just to be clear.
Oh yeah.
Like, these are learned skills. These are things that we all have to suck at in order to get better at. Just as a quick note as to what Geek Scorpio said, he's not calling you a bad game master if you can't do this or if you're new to doing this. So just to be clear, that's not what he's saying.
Yeah, no. It's anybody can do this, but you'll always have to start somewhere. And some game masters seem to be right out of the gate super amazing. And we've talked about this before. You don't have to be Matt Mercer's level of game mastering to play Dungeons and Dragons, to be a game master for anything.
God, I want to be though.
Oh, I want that production value.
Him, Brennan, somebody, like, just they're so talented. And that's I think I did mention this on the original episode too, just as kind of a note and to kind of go along with what Leo said. You don't have to be them, right? And they admit, and I admit, you out there at home likely do something that I would never think of. You likely at home do something that is so much better than anything I could do of the same nature, right? So maybe you're a combat person, you just have a really big tactical mind, and you can visualize moving the pieces around the board as your players are making their moves. That's huge. Running an effective, efficient combat is a learned skill. It's not something that everyone just does, right? Or maybe, storytelling is your bag, or the lore, or painting miniatures, or something. I mean, guaranteed, you as a game master out there have something special and unique only to you that you do well, that other, even professional game masters, Matt Mercer, Brendan Lee Mulligan, etc., at least in the tabletop space, may not even do as well. You may do something better than they do, and they're going to do some things better than you do. That's just the nature of being a person, I think.
Yeah. So to start with this is not a subject that we are just sort of pulled out of a hat. There is subjects, these have been talked about from game designs and game design studios, and some of them are even taught as several classes in game schools when people are learning games. So let me track to an article that was made a while ago. I don't remember when it was originally made, but I did find it. So there was a paper that was written called the MDA, and you may have heard me talk about this in other past episodes. So here's what it is. At some point, I want to do an episode to break this down because this is on a different side of game design, which is actually building a game. But let me explain that. So what this is, MDA is short, and it's M as in Mike, D as in David, and A as in Alpha.
As a note, 2001 to 2004 was when it was taught.
Mm-hmm.
The abstract was made.
Oh, and that the abstract. Okay, so with that, what this is that it's a document that was written up, and it was explaining mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. Now, what this is sort of breaks down to is how that you would basically design a game for itself. And correct me if I'm wrong, mechanics is sort of the nitty-gritty, the numbers, the nuts and bolts of the game itself. Aesthetics is how it looks or how it approaches for the game, and dynamics is sort of the
Dynamics is basically how the mechanics of the game interact with the players.
Oh, that's what it is. It's how it interacts with the players on that one. And different game designs will take different approaches for that. So when they do these game designs, they will take these aspects to heart on what type of game that is designing for it. But part of that is what kind of players they want to interact with, which way that they want to go. We also did an episode on YouTube once about discussing the generality of that when we were talking about the game Valheim, because it has a unique approach for that. Now, that being said, so this is a topic that comes up once a while, and it's very important to understand your game. Now, for tabletops, on the other hand, and this will apply for tabletop games, typically the players interact in a different way. So as a game master, you can adjust for that. And as I've learned today, this is such an important concept that they actually talk about in Dungeons & Dragons Game Master Manual in 4th edition and in 5th edition. I don't think they had one in 3rd edition, though.
I don't think
I have to
so.
read it, but I don't think so. Yeah.
I know they didn't have it in the 1st edition or in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. They had a Game Master Manual, but they don't actually talk about this particular thing.
Likely, since this was being released, 2001 to 2004, 3.5 came out July 2003 for Dungeons and Dragons. So likely it probably would have missed this, or this would have been a newer school of thought that likely would not have been in the book at the time.
That makes sense.
Without checking. That's my answer.
So if you want to correct us, great. I get that.
Get in the comments.
Get in the comments. Not one that I have as 2nd edition, but I know on 1st edition they didn't even think they barely came out with a monster manual.
Yeah, I mean, Gygax has gone on record saying some things, like if your player wants to play a dragon, you should let them, which I think is kind of in line with this school of thought, right? In that the joy of your players, the things that they're doing that make them have fun, and their interaction with the rules as they stand can be flexible. He's like, if they want to be a dragon, let them be a dragon. They'll be a really weak dragon, but let them be a dragon. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. He's quoted as having said things along that line. So I think it's kind of baked into the spirit of the game, but I don't think it's been codified until 4th and 5th edition.
Right. And even then, they I think it's on the first page of every game of a lot of tabletop games, especially Dungeons & Dragons, says if you need to bend the rules, do it.
They're more like guidelines.
So what we were talking about is player archetypes, the type of sort of a generality of a player. Much like in certain game development, really, some people are like 2, maybe 3 of these things in general. They'll surprise you, and they don't stick with this. But this is sort of a good guideline for it. So let me explain one of the first ones on it, which is kind of important, which I like to call this person the new guy. This is their first time playing any kind of tabletop RPG. They are new to the game. There's pros to this, which the biggest pro is they've already bought it. If they're new and they decided, I'm going to play this today, they are good to play this game. The biggest downside with it, they have no idea what this game is or if it's a new system. Or in a lot of cases, this is their first TTRP. They may not even have past knowledge. Like me having the experience with Dungeons & Dragons, Cortex, and even with a couple of oddball ones that are out there, like the Jade system and such. If you throw me into another system like Shadowrun that we've talked about before, I've never played Shadowrun, but I probably could wrap my head around it. But there's some people, your game may be the first TTRPG that they're doing, and in some cases, your game is a homebrew from the get-go. You have built a whole new system. Enjoy, and rules can be all over the place for that.
Yeah, in some ways, the new player is the hardest one to GM for because they can sometimes be the hardest to relate to if you've been a long time GM. It's really hard for me to remember the things that new players don't understand because it's been so long since I've been a new player. But things like, where do I look up my stats? What do these stats even do? Why am I rolling a skill check? What does that even mean? Those are questions that I don't even think about anymore. They're just an automatic response from me. Oh yeah, I want to do this. I should roll this skill. For new players, that's not something that's necessarily intuitive. And so what you really need more than anything else when dealing with a new player is patience.
Yes. Understand that they're new to it. And in my opinion, another way to do that is to simplify things. Take a lot of whatever stuff that they have to deal with as a player and take it off the board. A good example for that one is I've had a team of new people wanting to play Dungeons and Dragons, and I took as much math out of that system as they can. I'm like, go ahead, pick whatever stat you want. I'll do the calculations for it. Not great at it, but that way I can just get it so it's one less thing that they have to calculate.
That's interesting to me because that is not something that I necessarily subscribe to. Just because for me, right? Well, and a lot of my experience, right? I started playing in second edition and I've played ever since. But a lot of my DMing experience these days is based out of the fifth edition system, right? Fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons, and some off the cuff other editions of other games as well, Vampire being one of them. But for D&D, especially fifth edition, it is so math light comparatively to other systems. I had a level 17 character, and I think I had like a plus 15 to hit or a plus 16 to hit, something like that, which is still math, don't get me wrong, and I'm not a big fan of that, but math in my TTRPGs, it's more likely than you'd think. I just don't know that I for me at least, I want the new person to understand why the mechanics are happening and what makes them function, which is why, for me at least, I'm hesitant to remove that portion, those calculations from them. Yes, it's more confusing. Yes, it does bog things down. Absolutely. I don't mean to say it doesn't, but I do think that it does take some of the agency away from the player, and I'm always a little hesitant to do that.
That's fair. You want to sort of judge that.
Yeah, true.
So for the reason why I try to take as much math away is because I'm from the back in the THACO days, which math was confusing.
You said the cursed word.
Actually, I said THACO sucks, but I kind of like it. I don't know what that says about me. It didn't make any sense, but I really kind of enjoyed the system.
I kind of get it. It's a weird pride thing. You're like, oh, I get THACO. You know what? Now I'm using THACO, and it makes sense. It's just a lot of calculations to make it make sense.
I really kind of enjoyed the fact that armor class went down when you got higher. I don't know why that's so novel to me. It just made some semblance of sense, I guess. Like, oh yeah, so you're harder to hit, so like your armor is lower. I don't know. I just, as a child learning, it made some sense to me, I guess.
Oh yeah, no, I get it. But I think, yeah, in this case, basically, patience is your biggest asset for a new player. No matter what system it is, keep in mind, whoever's playing it, this is their system. And in some cases, as a game master, you may have been thrown into this as just a new person yourself. We've had people on the show that has talked about this, like, hey, this is a new game. Fine, I'll do it. I'll game master this.
Don't quite know what they're getting into.
Yeah,
I learned that the hard way when I did Cyberpunk. I got halfway through that book and I got tired.
More than a few of us have run into that.
Although it was a really interesting system, I liked how they did some of their backstory. There was a case where you could roll for backstory, and I'm like, okay, that's neat to me.
I do love
One
that.
bit of advice that I heard for the new guy that I think is really important is let them get away with something you wouldn't let a veteran player get away with.
Mm.
You know, if
Yeah.
if they come up with an idea where they're like you're fighting, you say, for example, you've got a bunch of plant monsters attacking. Plant monsters would normally be weak against fire, and you know your veteran players know that. So you have a fire resistance placed onto your plant monsters to counteract that. So what happens when your new player says, "Oh wait, we should use fire"? Your fire resistance is now meaningless. That player's idea worked because the new player is now engaged in your game and you want to encourage that.
Or if you have a table of new guys.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh yeah.
yes, yes.
I think I have a slightly different approach than you guys, and part of this might just be specific to my experiences. I've never actually gotten to run a full campaign just because a lot of mine tend to be one shots or very brief um like module type things because that's all I can get
Mhm.
that's all I can get people to the table for. So, I guess my question with the new guy is how long am I going to see them? Because that'll kind of dictate how much like the approach I take. If they're a new guy, we're doing a one shot, say for charity or something. My general approach would be, put them at a higher level where they can do more cool stuff, give them and just kind of help walk them through. Like, there's like immediately toss them into combat or like a commerce situation, or basically throw them like right into the action to get them going on
Mhm.
something. But if I'm going to see them for a while, let's say it's the beginning of more of like a module, but not a full scale campaign, that might be starting at level 1 and kind of doing more of like a I think of it of like a it's a small world kind of thing. Like, you're on a ride and there are guardrails and like you can kind of wander off if you get out of the boat, and we'll make room for that for sure. But like, here's a chance to RP. Let's see if you like that. Nope, that went over badly. Okay, here's someone just stole from you. There's a crowd. Like, pickpocketing is one of the funnest ways to get people out of their shell when they're new because they're like, they just stole from me. And there's almost always immediate outrage. um,
They might be mad, but they're invested.
Yes.
Yep.
They're like, "They took my gold or my sword or something," "You just won this
Mhm.
prize that lets you go to this special festival. Oh no, someone took it." You see them go that way with whatever perception roll, even if it's a 1. You still saw them somehow.
I think they took their object. They didn't take your object. They took their object.
That's how they'll argue it when they catch the thief.
Mhm.
Exactly.
I actually like that approach, especially if it's like a something short, like a one shot or such, because it gets them invested in there early, and it gets the player to start moving on parts for that. But yeah, so there's definitely a bunch of different approaches for the new person who's on there. So moving on, and I think this is funny because we're talking about die rolling, and this is one that I used to do all the time as a player, and I think I still do. It's called the gambler. They like to take a chance. They like to take the big risks. The gamblers are pretty neat because this is their biggest pro about this, is that they will take a long shot if they think it'll work for that one. The biggest con about that is they will take a long shot if it thinks it's going to work out for them.
Having been your game master many times, Leo, let me correct you. They will take a long shot even if there's no chance it will benefit them.
That's me.
I've seen you many times do something that I have explicitly told you won't work because you thought I meant I have a 1,000 chance.
So there's still a chance.
But I heard there was a chance though, right?
It does kind of remind me, like, in a lot of these archetypes, you may start out as one and you may evolve into another one. When I was much younger, I was playing a superhero based game and I had a character who had super strength, right? He used these chain whips, it was the whole thing. But we were riding in a helicopter and, another enemy helicopter pulled up next to ours and, firefight ensued. And then there's me, Mr. Melee, being like, cool, yep, that's fine, no big deal. So I looked around for some stuff and I threw the fire extinguisher and that did something. And then, I threw a chair and that did a little bit more. And so I threw another chair and I threw a third chair. And then eventually we were out of seating. And our helicopter took a bunch of damage. And they were like, oh, crap, strap in, we're going down. and we couldn't because I had thrown the chairs out the window at the other helicopter. And so it's one of those things, right, where I was like, I didn't know what else to do, and I didn't want to just sit there because this is like a climactic moment. So I was like, yeah, just, I don't know if it's gonna work, just throw things. There's kind of another one in the same game a little bit later on where we were fighting like a big bad, and he was this like psychic evil dude, kind of Magneto-esque, but a little bit different. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna go attack him, and he's like, okay, well, roll. We rolled, and this guy was it was meant to be one of those like cinematic moments where the heroes fail, right? Which is dangerous for you game masters out there. Be careful with this. It works really well in video games. It does not work so well in tabletop necessarily. Players hate to lose. I don't know. It's weird. So I went through punching him. He broke my arm. I tried to hit him with my chain whip. He broke my other arm. I tried to kick him. He broke my leg. I like hobbled towards him to try to like headbutt him. They broke my other leg. And eventually I was like worming my way on the ground because I, as a player, was tenacious, and I was like, if I can just connect, if I can just get in there, I can do something. And like the entire party lost, and we were supposed to, but it was one of those moments where I was like, don't tell me the odds, I'm going for it, because it's who I was and who my character was at the time. I was like, full send, no half send, full send all the time. But I would say that I'm not necessarily like that kind of a gamer as much anymore. I'll play a character like that every now and again, but it's not my default as it was back then.
Well, I mean, everybody loves it when you get a critical role, because they're rare. Everybody likes when the rare, unexpected thing happens, So obviously, there are players that's going to be what they like the most about the game is when the rare, unexpected thing happens. And so, if you want to engage players like that, give them some rare chances. Give them something that could work, but it's really kind of dicey. But if it works, oh man, it's going to be amazing.
I got it to work once in this campaign I was doing. It was a superhero campaign as well. I think Mutants and Masterminds was a system. And my character was a really high skilled character, and I put like something, because I'll do this for when I make a character, was I put something weird in there. I had a character once who was a master at 20th century pop culture. Why? Just cause, for funsies. We were doing this, and we got trapped inside this train, and this train had like all these carriages, but the first train had a demon in this, and the demon was trapped us, and they had this huge puzzle. And the problem is that you could challenge the demon. If you challenge the demon itself, though, you could be at risk of getting wiped out or something. And at this time, all the other players I was playing with, they were taking a while to think about what they're wanting to do this, and they were all about what will minimize the most risk to myself or to the party and move on. I went the opposite side, and I challenged that demon to a fiddle contest.
Amazing.
Did you win?
Yeah, I had no fiddling skills whatsoever, but I did have I did take my bow and arrow and turned it into a lousy fiddle, and then I played against it. And he's like, okay, but this and I won. And as tradition, I kept the golden fiddle, and we left. It goes, all right, but just to let you know, this golden fiddle is cursed, and this curse would affect it, like your whole party if you dare leave with it on the train. And then when we got to the end, I just left the violin and walked away.
I mean, that's when you just keep the bow to melt it down later and leave the actual violin, since the bow isn't necessarily cursed.
The bow's not cursed. That was my bow. But the violin, oh, hella cursed. Super cursed.
Also, I think I might argue with a player about whether or not the bow is a necessary part of the violin.
I 100% would make that bow cursed. I'm sorry. That's part of the violin. Use cursed.
I mean, maybe.
A violin with no bow is not much of a violin in my mind. However, Dicey and I have played games together before, and we do have in a good way, we have a different way of looking at things. There have often been times where Dicey would be like, well, what about this? And I'll be like, I don't like that. No. like I don't have a reason. It's not like I'm right and they're wrong. It's just like, I don't like it. So like, yeah, fair enough.
But yeah, my other players were taking forever to make a decision. I'm like, or I can move it along and just take a shot in the dark, and no one stopped me for some reason.
Yeah, that does happen quite a bit where the chaos. I'd almost call the gambler the chaos player a little bit.
Yeah.
They will and can and will take any opportunity they can to do that. I will admit, if this shocks anyone, that that's kind of my over archetype.
What?
Probably
No.
the name definitely didn't give it away at all, but
Dicey like dice.
Shocked.
Dicey is
Shocked.
and don't tell me the odds.
Huge gaming theater presents and Dicey Vim lore drop right here.
I will say one of my favorite things to do with other people within this archetype, because I can very easily get into that mindset. And I feel like as a DM, you kind of have to, because you just never know. You just never know. Like one thing I did as a player, I laugh at it now as a DM, is my one of my characters just had real bad luck, and she happened to magically hear bandits behind this boulder uphill saying that they were going to get her. So she made a Molotov cocktail with an oil flask, threw it at them. They caught fire, and she started whipping them to death because she's afraid that if she got too close, they'd give her a flaming hug. And that's how she beat those
Valid fear,
bandits.
honestly.
Also, one of the most unhinged sentences outside of Dungeons and Dragons context you'd ever hear.
Yeah.
So I threw a Molotov cocktail at them and whipped them to death. Like, dang, okay.
Did not want
Why'd you whip them to death? They gotta stay over there.
Yeah.
I don't want to be lit on fire.
pretty much. But one of the
back fire creatures.
one of my I made them. It's fine. You've been summoned to be a fire creature now. Congrats. How to make a fire elemental as a non-wizard.
If you don't have homemade store-bought, it's fine.
Exactly. But in that kind of like genre, one thing I like to throw at players is random crap. Because you never know how they're going to cobble together random crap or put them in a scenario where it's like, all right, you're in a room that's locked. They've taken your weapons, but they didn't take your packs. What do you got in there? And just like giving them a chance to essentially be MacGyver, I guess. Come up with give them a specific opportunity that's not necessarily straight combat, to be like, let's try tying these bed sheets and pretending to be a ghost and rely on our charisma rolls to make them think the tower is haunted.
No, it's totally haunted.
Oh shit, that tower's haunted. I've
Move
gone
us
here
away.
20 years and I
I
didn't
think
know
really
that.
just as a GM, you need to not reject the crazy ideas. You know,
Yes.
it can be easy to be like, "There's no way that would work. That's absurd. That's a dumb idea. This is D&D. This is meant to be fun. This is this part of your life where you get into, and the crazy ideas work, not because they're realistic, but because they're fun."
I agree to a point. I am not as I guess free and open as the three of you. I want a little bit of those reins in my hand still, just a little bit, so I can pump those brakes if I need to. You know, like I definitely agree. The crazy ideas are awesome. They're fun, and the Hail Mary plays are incredible. But you know, you see these ideas on the internet and other places where someone's like, yeah, with a level 5 wizard and a level 5 artificer, I can make nukes. And it's like, yeah, maybe, but like, what does that do? I mean, and I'm not saying don't let your players do this, but you should have an active role in that. And it should be one of those things, I think, as a game master, where you see where that road goes, but be ready to be like, okay, you can make one nuke. That's all the nuke material in the world. You get one of these, or you make it a high DC or a high roll or what have you. Just because, if someone drops a nuke in my capital city, that's a one hell of a story hook. That's fair, but then I have to pick up those pieces.
Yeah.
I have to be like, what happens with that? And maybe at that point in time, right? Maybe that's not the kind of game that I want to run, right? So I definitely agree. Like, allow the chaos, go with it, lean into it because it's fun. But also, there are some things in some situations, in some cases, where it's okay to be like, hey, Jim, Dane here, love this idea. Above board, hilarious, incredible. Above the table, I love it to death. In game, gonna really screw up everything. Is there any way we could maybe do something else?
And that's important to note because, like, you do as a game master and a DM, you want to rein it in of it. Let them use that, but let them know also you may want to go to the extent of having consequences. There was a game that I ran that because I was lazy and didn't want to bother with weight classes in packs, so I gave every player a bag of holding. So that way I didn't have to worry about that. So I go, all right, but keep in mind, this will come back to haunt you. And Rob was my player at the time, and he had a pet dragon. Yeah.
No.
Well, so to keep this pet dragon, he needed to feed it constantly. And I forgot what he did, but he ended up getting something like 1,000 pounds of fish, and he just shoved it in the bag. I'm like, and he just puts his hand in there, grabs some fish, and feeds it to his pet dragon. I'm like, cool.
Inspired.
That's not where I thought it was going. I'm more relieved.
Well, the story's not done. Don't worry.
Oh, no.
There's more.
There's more. So later they have to fight this boss at some point, and Rob was going to make this big attack, and he was going to jump in as a big entrance. When he did that, I had to roll for this big entrance, and he critically failed, and I had his bag rip open. And my favorite thing is me as the big boss just stood there, and all the other players decided to stand there for the rest of their turns, waiting for 1,000 pounds of fish to just fall down on top of him.
No, we'll wait.
It turns out 1,000 pounds of fish going through a 2-foot hole takes a while to get through.
So my players were just in the what are we gonna do? Do we wait? Sure. They were so dumbfounded they didn't know what to do, if they could do anything. I'm like, well, my guy's just gonna wait and just watch the disaster happen. And so, like, there's this pile of fish, and it goes, all right, what's your turn? I'm going to attack the boss. And what are your turn, Rob? I'm gonna go pick up this fish.
It was specifically because at that point I was buried neck deep in fish, and so I couldn't really do much. So my turn was spent removing the fish from my person so that I could actually move to attack the boss.
Now, Rob did not see that coming as an option at all, but I, as the master, decided, you know what? My random effect is going to be this, and it's just hilarious to me.
Well, and to Dane's point, that's a perfect example of the long shot also kind of working in the DM's favor where there are consequences and it's still a memorable, fun story. Like, you guys are actively laughing telling that story. And my first thought is, do you have a necromancer who can now have 1,000 pounds of fish attack the boss? but you know what I mean? Like, sometimes the repercussions of your own actions, especially the long shot stuff you never expected to work or happen, can also just be as equally valid. So, like, I support crazy suggestions and ideas, but I do agree with Dane that there also have to be repercussions to a point. Now, if we're going back to like a gambling new guy, they can gamble a little bit longer than maybe a standard player, but then, at some point they're going to catch on fire or get crushed by 1,000 pounds of fish. It's just kind of finding a good balance.
It's in the cards at some point.
And to be honest, I don't think the gambler wants to succeed every time. That's boring.
Yes.
It's not gambling.
Yeah, it's not gambling.
At that point, that's just winning.
Winning.
Which is not what the gambler is here to do.
The gambler's here to take a long shot.
Savor that sweet, sweet long shot.
Delicious. So moving on to the next guy, though, if the gambler is about chaos, somebody who is very much about order is the person that I like to call the number cruncher. They like to see their numbers and their stats get bigger. They like to know that these stats do a thing that they can do stat-wise. They like stats. They like to see those numbers grow.
Number go up.
Yeah, this honestly, out of all of the player types, this is me right here. I absolutely love more than anything else making a character with a cool, efficient build, where the numbers work together well and where they go up. And, it doesn't even necessarily matter that my character is winning or losing. I just know that his stats are high.
What's this? I can hurt you pretty badly, or I can trade this item to get a +1 to whatever. I'm in. My favorite line is like it's in the what is it? It was an old 8-bit theater. It's in 8-bit theater. There's a character named Red Mage who's all about the D&D life because that's how he sees everything as a tabletop. And somebody asks him, he goes, "Hang on, you have a +4 to strength girdle that you're wearing?" Hey, buddy, for +4 strength, I will wear my underwear backwards on my head. That's the guy.
I've got an ogre slaying knife. +4 to ogre, +9 to ogre slaying.
So I have probably my favorite example of this. Honestly, was when I was playing as a wizard in a 5th edition game. And at this point in my gaming career, I was really sick of being like ambushed and surprised and stuff like that. I hated failing perception checks and not knowing what was happening because I had failed a perception check. So as a wizard, my intelligence was obviously my highest stat, but my second highest was wisdom, specifically so I would succeed on perception checks. And there's a skill, I forget what it's called, that basically makes it so that your passive perception checks all get a +5 to them, which is huge. It's essentially saying that every time you have a passive perception check, one that the GM asks you to make, not one that you are making, like, not if I search the thing, I have to use active perception checks. But if the GM says make a perception check, that's a passive perception check. And with the skill, that means that all of those rolls are now a 15. That's what my passive perception is, a 15 plus whatever my perception is. It was awesome. I was constantly passing these perception checks to the point where my GM stopped bothering to he planned on me passing these perception checks. But here's the important part. He kept those perception checks around. 40 sessions in, he didn't say to himself, oh, Rob's going to spot this thing. I shouldn't even bother to hide it. No, he kept that thing hidden so that I could pass the perception check and feel good about that choice I made in upping my perception. So if you want to engage this type of player, let them use that cool skill.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to go with that one. Especially for engagement. To Dane's credit, I've got a +5 to ogre slaying. And that's an old D&D joke if you ever hear it. But it's like, at that point, put an ogre somewhere in there. It may never, just somewhere. You know what? Today's the day. I need this.
Was there an ogre in this encounter before? No, but there is now.
No, what was it? An old Family Guy joke. It was, do you like cake? Yes. Do you like pie? Pie? Yes. Would you like to eat cake with this pie? And then Peter Griffin just picks out this fork. Well, Rusty, today's the day.
And that's, I think, a really good point. You know, this is not the cake bit. That's a good point too. But about, you know, incentivizing and rewarding your players for playing in the archetype they want to play in, right? Obviously, if they're a problematic player, this doesn't apply. But I'm not the first person to say this, but as game masters, regardless of system agnostic, we should, and hopefully do, want to create a story for the people playing it, right? I'm not writing notes. I'm not spending hours of my life each week that I have a session planning, and I know what GM prep is different for everybody, so I'm going to speak to my own experience. If you don't do this, it's okay. If you just show up at the session and freewheel it, that's awesome. I'm happy for you. I can't do that. My brain will not let me. But
don't get me wrong. And today's point, some people will go in and just go.
Yeah.
And I've seen Dane do that. It's amazing.
Oh, I'm not that kind of guy. Not usually. I can improv with some of them,
but no, some game masters, they can do. Sometimes they very little work for that. Other game masters will do an extra work, and it's really you as the game master will know which way you want to go. This is something on that one. I've spent one session that I took. What was it? I took 4 months of prep work to just study and get this work down. I only ended up I used everything, and then I'm like, oh crap, I got 3 sessions in and I still have nothing left. I'll wing it for the last 3.
Sure. And so for me, right, I spend a lot of time prepping because I want to tell a story for the people playing my game. I put hours of work into my own sessions because I want to make sure that I am as prepared as possible in case they throw me a curveball. You know, and that's not to say it can't deviate, right? I'm not going to be that kind of guy who's like, you're walking down the road and they're like, oh, I want to go to the right. And it's like, oh, this tree. Can't get by the tree. It's huge. And they're like, cool, I'm going to go to the left. Like, oh, there's another tree. I don't know, man. A lot of trees about. Guess you just have to go the one way that I want you to go.
Like one treeless way.
Yeah, I'm definitely not that kind of guy, but I do spend a lot of time trying to make sure that I am as prepared as possible because I want to tell a story that my players will enjoy. In my case, I'm very fortunate. They're all my friends in real life. We're able to play together. And I want to create something for them because I love them. I want them to play in this world, in this space, and to feel cool and feel empowered and to leave the real world and the problems they're in behind because
Mm.
I do really care for them and I want them to have a fun time. I'm not making this Dungeons and Dragons campaign solely for me. You know, do I get something out of it? Yes, absolutely. It's not altruistic, I wouldn't say, but at the end of the day, without them, I wouldn't be doing it.
Yeah.
Like without my players, I'd be writing a book. It's different. It's a way different thing. And so why would I not, you know, to Rob's point, why would I not want to create a hidden thing that he's going to find in that scenario? Of course I
Mhm.
would. That makes sense to me. He's having a good time. He's not hurting anything. It's what he built his character to do. Dope. Sick. Awesome. Here you go. There's a hidden box in every room. Or not every room, but you know what I mean. Like, there's a hidden box in some rooms. Find it. And Rob's like, I got you. Yeah, let's do it.
This one's filled with spiders.
Yeah. That's another thing. Right? Like, not everything that's hidden is a good thing, right?
So,
So if the
maybe
DM
there's a
wanted,
reason we hid this box away.
yeah, if the DM wanted to like not punish Rob, but if he wanted to like challenge Rob and Rob's expectations of like, yeah, I'm the guy who finds things. You're like, cool, you found this thing. Up, it's trapped. It's covered in glyphs, and you didn't notice it. Now it explodes. Like you're fine, but a little hurt and damaged. Then maybe Rob thinks twice about grabbing the button, the next box that he finds. Maybe not though. But that's still a cool moment, right? Because Rob was able to find the hidden thing, even if it ends badly for his character. It's still a neat thing. He's like, yeah, I found that. What up?
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
and I think that's a good point. You have anything else to say, Dice?
Yeah, there's two things I kind of like to do with number crunchers, and again, I usually have a shorter window than
Mhm.
I think the rest of you have had. But two things I like to throw at number crunchers: renown and cursed objects. So
Oh.
renown I like because it's a stat that they can gain. So like for example, your seer, the person that the finder of things, might get a reputation for that. So then like as they continue to go through a story, say it's just a module with like a village, they'd be like, I've heard of Rob, the seer, we and then, village stories tend to get blown out of proportion, so suddenly it goes from you literally finding things to you being psychic. So that's also kind of like a fun way to play with that, depending on
Mhm.
what they're doing to give them like another hidden stat to grow one way or the other. And then cursed objects is fun for number crunchers that are all around number crunchers. So like you talked about wisdom and perception or wisdom and intelligence. If they just want
Mhm.
like the perfect, character with all of the highest stats, it's kind of fun to throw a cursed object at them that will inhibit their kind of default one. So if they're kind of, number cruncher slash hack and slashy,
Mhm.
maybe giving something that inhibits their strength but boosts their dex so that it's like, I mean, you get a disadvantage on this, but advantage on this to see if they can't play with some of the other stats they don't maybe use as often as their default.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, as a number cruncher, even if I ultimately decide not to use the cursed sword that increases my strength but decreases my dex, I guarantee you I'm having the time of my life making that decision.
Okay. Speaking of hack and slash, that's the next guy I wanted to talk about, the hack and slashers. These are the guys, combat solves every problem in this. They want to build strategies, they want to fight, they want to and ultimately a lot of TTRPGs have a combat system in there for a reason. Not all of them do. There's a few I know of that don't have have a physical combat system, I should say. Sometimes they have a social combat or some sort of combat. But these guys will plan strategies. They love the tactics of the game, and they love to see that they're like Lothar, the giant ogre, slashing through his this powerhouse and such. So they're fun because it's weird to say, but it's fun because it's simple. All they want to do is fight something and win.
Well, and I mean, because there really are two different types of hack and slashers. You kind of hit on both of them. One of them is the tactician that really wants to like, come up with a cool strategy and face the boss with a quirky gimmick that they have to work around and they have to think
Mhm.
about. And the other one is just, I just want to roll dice and hit big numbers and kill cool monsters, and I don't really want to think about it too much. Those are really two different types of players that I think often get lumped together.
Like in this category. But that being said, though, I don't know if you've ever bumped into that. There's a player that I play with once in a while. Um, I try to limit as a game master their combat situations because they took way too. It took an hour to do one fight, and I'm like, there's only 3 people in this room, and you're one of the 3 people. Just trying to build tactically all the this is like, okay, I can go here and here and here, and then we can do this move. And my favorite one is like, I can make this move, this move, this move, and we can, okay, I've got it down. I've got this perfect strategy down. All right, I'm gonna go here. You can't move there. Ah, dang. Start over. I'm like, okay, I had to deal with this because I wanted to make sure everybody else was being able to move around and such. As much as I wanted to, I cut down the amount of combat situations in the game for this module just because I don't want to spend an hour waiting for this guy's turn. It actually got so bad once I actually had a clock.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think
Chess.
was the solution we came up with eventually was the clock, and it's actually a better solution than you might think. The official rule that we created was you have 1 minute to resolve your actions, and if you don't, then you waste your turn. And the thing is, you only have to bring that clock out once. Once the player sees that you're serious about that, and you really will time him, and you really will cut off their turn, they will never have a problem following that timeline again.
Mhm. Now that's an extreme response for that one, but that was a very extreme scenario. It was literally the entire game's being held up. We've set aside 2 hours for this game. Half an hour of it is it just this one combat situation, and it was for the lowest bidder on this of the combat situation. And we were just like, dude, these guys are lowest level one. Push them over. It'll be fine. It'll be done. Now that was an extreme situation for it. Now some people will build strategies for it, and sometimes seeing people's strategies is a fun thing in itself. And I've told this story to many people. I was playing Baldur's Gate 3, and Tristan, who's been on this podcast show before, was watching me play. Goes, hey, so you can take Karlach, which at this point you can have Karlach at this team, and go fight this giant spider. I go, or I could take the phase spider children and start throwing it at the giant spider. They'll never see it coming. Well, yeah, but why though? Because I can do it. It's an option I have.
You don't always have to play optimally.
No.
True.
Like some people do. Some people prefer that, right? But it's perfectly fine to do the suboptimal option.
I actually have a good example of that. I was a wild magic sorcerer in a group of newbies at a work game, and we were kind of getting our butts kicked by a pack of wolves in Saltmarsh. And I know what happens if I wild magic surge. That's why I picked the class. But I thought it would probably not be a good idea to nuke a bunch of newbies on accident, their first campaign. So my magic sorcerer cast throw rock. So they just throw rocks. And even though it extended the combat, we had to have a wandering cleric that just happened to come by and heal us all for free happen, it was just a better choice in that case because even though it was suboptimal because it kept us alive and we wouldn't, hurt the experience of the other players. So, you know,
Mm-mm.
to kind of echo Dane on that, one thing I think is kind of a fun approach for hack and slashers to get them engaged in other areas of non-direct combat is like combat adjacent activities. So to me this is kind of like your competitive person a little bit. And so getting them
Mhm.
into things like, you're at a tavern and, a guy comes up and buys you a beer and is like, "I heard you killed the blah blah blah." You know, let's hear your tales, and you get to have them RP the moment they killed the thing, or challenges them to an arm wrestling contest, or there's a random pie eating contest in the square. There's little ways you can kind of nudge them into like RP or commerce or other little things like that to allow other people room in between combats.
Hmm. And honestly, you need that. If at least for certain players and such. I know me as a player and me as a game master will do this all the time. As much as I do enjoy watching a combat position, I need to have some RP in my. I need to have some story in my combat system somewhere, because it breaks up the flow for it. You could burn yourself out from fight after fight after fight after fight. Now, don't get me wrong. I've actually done a game where it's just combat, 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 back and forth, and that can be fun if it's done right. But also, I'm going to go with the R of this RPG and having sure to have some kind of role playing that's happening.
Well, and I think that's a convo too with the players. Like it's one thing if you're kind of getting a rando group, like if you're doing an event or something else, obviously that's much harder to kind of guess. You can always ask
Mhm.
people at the very beginning, like, hey, kind of what's your style? If it's an experience table, if it's not, you got to kind of roll with the punches on that. But if you know it's going to be a hack and slash group, then you can also kind of design it that way. Kind of to your point about you've done a game with it being combat heavy and just like throwing, there's chocolate in my peanut butter. There's one floor with the magical cleric that shows up in time every time. That's like, I have to tell you the story of my childhood for me to heal you. There'll be a quiz after or something crazy. I don't know. This is how I invoke my god in this dungeon. Do you want healed or not? But that's also a thing to be like, if you have a hack and slashy group, then you just slant it more towards that. Not to say the DM
Right.
shouldn't also have fun and sneak in the DM fun things for them, but if you're more of a puzzles DM and you've got a hack and slash group, I don't know, make the puzzle come alive at some point and fight them. The giant lock you just smashed is now mad and alive and is 1,000 tiny spiders. Kill it.
Now, you could also have a player who's just, I'm here to roll dice to hit a really big target. And the thing is, as simple as it is, those guys can be fun for your team of players. And the reason why I say that is because they're typically the reliable fighter. And sometimes you want to have that. Greg over here will roll a 1d12 and usually hit 90% of the time. I just need Greg to hit something. That's all. Everybody else can do whatever kind of crazy spells or things they need to, but Greg's gonna punch that guy. That's all Greg's here for, and Greg's happy with that. I've had some players that like, that's it. Well, what do I do? You can hit the guy. Can do, and that's all I want.
Yeah, a lot of people like that out there.
I can hit this guy really hard. It is my skill. It is what I do well. Now going on to the next character archetype I want to talk about, which, speaking of role playing in my RPG, is the role players. The role players are interesting because what they'll do is that they will create backstories for their character. They will invest themselves into the role of this world. They invest themselves into the player, into the character that they've made. They will they have hopes and dreams and goals and such. These guys are kind of fun because essentially they have a whole story for their own character, and they'll make decisions based upon what that character's lifestyle is, or how they run in life, or what they do. The biggest con about that is that they will also run the character for that, even in some extreme cases where it's completely detrimental for their character on that. And I've bumped into sort of this big thing for it in a couple of ways. I was running a gentleman thief character for a particular game once, and I did that because I was a gambler. And then, but the team I was with happened to get a little more murder hobo even than I expected, and they're like, "Okay, we can go fight this guy and take his stuff." And I got, he gave us the information. I don't need to fight them. At some point, my character actually is like, "Oh, but don't you have this huge agility set?" "Yeah, because I'm a thief, and if I'm a good thief, I don't need to actually hurt anybody." And that was sort of his logic. And so every time that they would go into a combat encounter, he would do his best to stay away from that combative encounter. Me as a player knows, I mean, I could efficiently help take him out, but me as the character would be move over. That's not what he's about. The other players was slightly annoyed with that because that's the way I was playing. However, my game master was proud of that because I was the only non-murder hobo in the team.
Yeah, I mean that's really more a problem with like, one player isn't necessarily meshing with the other players. The group
Mhm.
cohesiveness isn't quite there. Because
Mhm.
honestly, it's pretty normal to have lots of different types of players in your group. It's a little bit rare where everybody's all on the same page about it's rare to have all your players be hack and slashers. It does happen, but that's a little bit more on the rare side. Um, and but when that does happen, you sometimes run into this problem where you have one player that just they're not finding the same fun that the rest of the players are. They're not enjoying the same things. And so it can be a little bit hard to balance them in that way. I want to give my thief opportunities to do his cool thief thing. But my three fighters that just want to fight dragons, they're not going to be here for that cool thief thing.
And it's kind of harsh. Although, when they all of a sudden needed a thief into this room because there's nothing to fight, now who are they calling? One of the coolest things is that if someone's a good enough role player for their thing, and you can understand them as a game master, sometimes if they know more, if they accidentally know more than they should for as a game master, their player, and we'll talk about this before, it's player knowledge versus character knowledge. The player will know something that's going on, but the character won't do that for whatever reason. There's this epic story that Rob has in this game that he did, where he set me aside and he needed somebody to trick our entire party by doing this. Now, my character in this case was super gung-ho, would go into fights constantly on this, and this is important to note. And this is the alien encounter in that barn.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Yeah. So I would go this gung ho fighting thing, and then so Rob sets me aside and cleverly sets every player aside and has a moment to talk to them for it. But he talked maybe like a week earlier, but it's like, okay, in order for this to work, and I think I can trust you to do this, I need you to pretend to be the villain of this story who's secretly trying to trick everybody, but you're like a doppelganger. And I spent no to Rob, I spent 3 days like planning out my moves and my things and which way to go for that. And so when we got to the session, my character got switched out, very much body snatchers sort of story style. So my dude got switched out, and so I gave a weird performance that made me give up when we were surrounded by aliens. I'm like, all right, giving up. I can't handle it. The way I gave up was in such a way that all the other players who were with me thought, oh no, Leo isn't fighting because he is scared, and these guys are really powerful, and we should just give up as well. And the entire party gave up there and quit fighting these guys.
Honestly, it was brilliant. It wasn't Leo's not acting like himself. It's Leo's acting differently. So this must be worse than any situation we've ever been in.
And the hard part was I needed to act in a way so my players would know it's not me, but also is still good enough to be me. And I had to understand my character enough to be able to pull that kind of move off. And acting brilliantly. When they found my character later, and they're like, "Oh man, well we just gave up because you're." So they found him later. I go, "Hang on, so you guys gave up because I gave up? Uh huh. Me? Uh huh. In this entire game, have you seen me stop or not fight anything in this game?" They're like, "Oh, you're an alien. Yeah, oh, yeah, that makes sense now."
Leo's a Cylon.
That was the club. Like, I was a Cylon.
To hear along the watchtower.
I had kind of maybe not a similar moment, but player knowledge versus character knowledge being mentioned just today, actually. I'm playing a fighter monk in 5th edition 2024. And it's been a lot of fun, but we had this thing go down with this goddess where a shard of her divinity was inherent in a statue, and we brought that statue accidentally to Sigil from the Planescape Torment video game. And for those of you who do not know, the Lady of Blades, the goddess who watches over that Sigil, that area, does not allow any other divinity in her realm at all. And so we opened the box, and the shard of divinity shattered and basically killed all of us. But we woke up in a morgue, amongst a bunch of bodies, and I was like, oh, my character in the previous game that we had played this guy, same world, different characters, was a paladin to the consort of this goddess. So I've got a lot of religion knowledge from this pantheon because I was a paladin,
Mhm.
and I started to ask the DM. I was like, oh, do we know if the shard of divinity exploding means that the goddess herself is not okay? Because there's a god war on in this world, so it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. But I started to ask this question as if I were my previous character, and I was like, wait, hold on, never mind. You can ignore that. I have an intelligence of 8 on this new character. I wouldn't even know to ask this question. And then he was like, yeah, that's fair. You don't really know. And I was like, yep, that's totally fair. But, it can be hard to separate the player knowledge from the person knowledge or the character knowledge.
Mhm. And for the role players, that's sort of the tightrope that they have to walk. It's the player knowledge versus the character knowledge. And also what decisions that they need to make as a player versus what decisions they need to make as a storytelling device. Because sometimes you have to change tactics, or else it's a total party wipe, and nobody likes that.
You can have a little metagame as a treat.
He's a little bit.
It's a Scooby snack.
Mm-hmm.
Now, after that, in the same vein, but way different at the same time, is the lore diver. The lore diver is the type of player who wants to explore the entirety of the world and the old world knowledge for that. So, and this can be great because that means those guys who game mastered and made and wrote literal pages and pages of works that probably no one will show up. That person wants to find it. That person wants to go explore the world knowledge. The downside is if you have to make pages and pages of lore because that person is going to want to explore for that one.
Yeah, I mean, and you could alternatively, you don't necessarily have to make up all these pages and pages of lore ahead of time, but you probably should if you're going to engage the lore driver, because it's also really important that you keep all that lore straight. And so if you're just going to make it up on the fly, there's a really good chance you're going to contradict something you said earlier.
Mm-hmm.
What were you saying, Dicey?
Oh, I was just gonna say, hey, Dane, what's that random shopkeeper's name?
That's how you get such amazing names as Tisket and Tasket, and they own a basket shop. Which I think actually Dicey gave me, if I'm not mistaken.
I love puns.
I believe that was a Dicey Vim special, but yeah, no, absolutely. I have a whole document of just important NPCs, and it's got everything from, I mean, this isn't one of them, but Boblin the Goblin to, the king and queen of the realm to, the random person that they stop to talk to at this one point in time, the proprietor of a brothel. Like it just depends on where the players go and who they've talked to. And now, if I ever go into a campaign too, once this one's finished, those characters may have to make a reappearance if it's around the same time frame.
Mm-hmm.
If it's in the future, obviously, then maybe they're dead. I don't know. But elves also live a hell of a long time, so it's hard to say.
That is true, but no, the important to. So a lot of if they're really cool lore divers, that they'll understand that for purpose and intent of the game, we can't spend the next 3 hours making a Wikipedia about this.
Wish I had
Or
that
can
time.
we?
That'd be amazing.
Can and shouldn't are two different things.
I got half a Wikipedia page in that's all you get. But no, if you can just at least keep it straight, it works. That's fine. Also for your naming convention, Dave, just to let you know, and this is on the record, Stan Lee would use alliteration so it was easier for him to remember which characters were which is why you have Peter Parker,
Reed Richards,
and Ben Grimm was because he's Ben Grimm.
Ridiculous.
I did not ever make that connection, but that makes a lot of sense.
He's not a very happy camper, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Though,
but no,
I wouldn't be either.
Matt Murdock.
I don't know why, but I really thought you were going to say Matt
Mercer.
And for some reason in my head, I was like, did Stan Lee create... Wait, that doesn't make any sense. Matt Mercer's a real person.
I mean, he could be his father.
Or is he?
Boom, boom, boom.
Papa.
This is my Matt Mercer fic about his origins from Stan Lee.
Yes.
Yeah, but honestly, I do kind of have like a love-hate relationship with lore divers. The fact of the matter is, I like making lore for the worlds that I'm creating. It's fun, and so I like to have a player that appreciates that. But also, I don't make that much lore, and so I don't like when a player is constantly nagging me for details that I haven't made up yet.
I think one thing that I feel like this is something that gets neglected a little bit when you talk about a lore diver, because when people talk about lore, they think pantheons, mythologies, like big, chunky world building things. And lore can just be something significantly smaller. One way I think is a good way to engage lore people and role players, in particular, but really anybody, like even if they're not like these are not their focus areas, hobbies in game. So like a
Hmm.
hobby or a pet or their Boblin the Goblin, whatever their favorite NPC that they go and talk to every time and maybe try to get elected mayor of a different city because reasons.
That's
Uh
never happened.
that's never happened.
Never gonna happen.
Yeah. Um, I think those are a good way to get engagement from those people. The lore divers will obviously learn all about the brewing industry in their world and try to like come up with their own thing, and then they're investing that time into that hobby to learn about like those, maybe it's mythology, maybe it's just like a cool brewing technique. Every time they go to a city, they go and talk to that local industry to learn like the regionality. So um, I do think there's some merit in like the small lore as well.
Hmm.
And that can get a little bit too grindy for the non-lore heavy GMs, but that's just to me another good way to get kind of like both role players and lore divers
Hmm.
and non-people in it. You worked at a
Yeah.
shop one time and now you have to check in every time you go back to the guild hall because you did that one day for a day job for punishment, and they just kind of like that now, even though they're more of a
Hmm.
hack and slash player. It gets them to RP a little, it gets them to give a little lore. It's just a nice kind of middle ground and something appreciated even by the fanatics of those categories.
Hmm.
And I think kind of along those lines, right? Like as a player asking for these things, having some grace and giving the DM or the GM some breathing room too, where it's like, hey, I'm really interested in knowing how much vegetation my druid can grow within a square cubic meter. I've got grow plants and I can feed people. How much, can I make in this plot of land? It's like, well, I don't know that offhand. Let's figure it out together. Let's see if we can find anything on the internet. Let's, do this after session or before the next session or what have you, and sort of be able to sort of come together and work out how much can a druid grow in a garden plot in a city, um, versus a normal farmer tilling the soil and whatnot. Um, and what does that look like, right? Like it's cool. It's a cool idea, and having the DM and GM being able to do that and being willing to do that is really a neat idea. But also being able to like not hold up the game by being like, "Hey, I've got a 47 strength. How many peanuts can I carry?" It's like I don't know, a billion.
A lot.
Uh, I'm not gonna take time out of session to look up how many peanuts an average person can carry. I'm gonna ballpark it, and if I'm way off base and wrong later, then we can revisit that later.
And I'm not gonna lie, the example Dane gave about the garden may or may not end up getting published as how to build an apology garden. The GM supplement.
Love it.
How'd you get this supplement? Oh, it's a thing. It's a thing that Dane did.
I didn't do anything.
It was definitely Dane. Definitely
I'm
Dane's
innocent. I torched my own city. You ever torched your own city, Leo? You know what that
uh
feels like?
not really, but
I murdered them, and not just the men, the women and children as well. I butchered them like animals. I'm quoting Star Wars, just to be clear.
I was
He's
about to
picking.
ask what your opinion on sand was.
I hate sand. It's rough and coarse, and it gets everywhere.
He was just picking daisies for Padme.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Go to your special place, the fields of Naboo.
go to
Uh,
special
but yeah,
house.
being willing to work with your players. I had a player approach me at one point, and they were like, "Hey, my character is from a specific city," and I was like, "Okay, cool, no problem." They're like, "Can I make that?" And I was like, what do you mean? Like, well, like, can I draw you a map and make all the town people and the you know NPCs and shops and stuff? And I was like, yes, yes, you absolutely can, because that's something I don't have to make at that point. And not to say that every player is going to be that way, right? There are some people who have no interest in sub creation or have little interest in sub creation. They want you to fill in the gaps of their own past, right? So if they're from a little city, maybe when they go back to that city, it's changed, it's different, and they want you as the DM to do that. But some players are absolutely interested in sub creating with you, being like, hey, here's what I have for this lore. I have these ideas. I have those ideas. So having players being willing to work with you in that regard, I think is really a lot of fun and really cool. I'm kind of a lore guy a little bit, but I'm also a role player. I would say those are kind of the two that I straddle. I love combat too. Don't get me wrong. Who doesn't? Combat's a part of the game.
Oh, it's fun.
But actually,
I do need some.
kind of on that note, this is one thing that I got introduced to a very long time ago that I really love, and I would encourage everybody to do, especially if you've got some role players in your group, and it's called 3x3x3.
Oh yeah.
And so what you do is, during the character creation phase, when they're making this, you give them a little piece of paper, and you ask them to create 3 allies, 3 enemies, and 3 associates that are part of their character's backstory. And all you really need from them are just like some simple details, like, a name, a race, what do they do for like work, or like what's their what's their relationship, and a sentence or two describing them. And that's it. So it doesn't generally take super long. Of course, your role players probably will spend lots of time agonizing over this and coming up with the perfect 9 NPCs for you to play with. But it's a way for your players to flesh out their characters, and it gives you a lot of NPCs to be inserting into your story that have direct ties to those players.
I dig that.
And so, like, usually the original way it was introduced to me to encourage players was you give them an experience point for every NPC that they create, in a system where 9 experience was a huge deal. That was like a session and a half worth of experience. But yeah, just something similar, just give them some sort of, reward for doing this little thing that isn't necessarily just the NPCs themselves. Just like, hey, if you can do this for me, maybe you'll start out at level 2 instead of level 1, or you'll get like an extra magic item on character creation or something like that. Give them a little reward, a bonus for doing this, and I guarantee your players will jump at it.
I think that's a really cool idea, and it does kind of help force that sub creation amongst the group. I will admit, I typed 3x into Google because I thought, this is before you would explain the situation, and Google was like, it's 27, dude. What do you want from me? I was like,
Thanks, ChatGPT.
You're right. That's on me. That's on me. Because I was like, oh, 3x3x3. Like, let's see if there's stuff written about this. I'm curious about it now.
No, this was for the old Serenity game, Cortex Classic, before it was even Cortex. And it was like
cool.
a fan supplement. So I doubt that there's
Sure.
I doubt
Shout
there's a whole
That's a
lot
cool
about
idea.
Shout out to that person, whoever they are.
Yeah. Yeah, wherever you are. Thank you, random citizen.
Yeah.
Side note, if it's 3x3x3, it's a square, so you only have 9 characters, not 27 as Google wants.
Yeah. Yeah. But you could ask your players for 27. Maybe you get 9 from most people, but the lore person you get 27 from, right? Like,
Yeah,
I kinda
actually,
went ham.
that is an important note for this. Cap it out at 9.
yeah.
Because you will get players that will make 40 NPCs for you, and just tell them you're only getting 9 experience. That's
Like, I'll take these 40, thank you, but
Here's my 27 brothers and cousins.
7
Wait,
brides for 7
your
brothers.
allies, your enemies, and your associates are all family?
That sounds right.
Are yours not?
I actually, more than once, I've had like, my mother is my ally, but my father is my enemy sort of thing going on. That's not unusual. And honestly, that makes for a more interesting story.
Yeah, it does.
One other thing, if I may bring it up, this kind of is brought up for me. Easter eggs. Easter eggs from their own personal lore or from the group lore. Like, if you're with someone for a longer period and you have that chance to build like history, like doing a callback to a particularly funny thing or like accidental thing they did, like stealing a gold mine or winning a pie eating contest or something like that, can be a fun moment for the whole group. Like individual Easter eggs are always cool for personal lore, but like a group Easter egg of like, I remember our first wanted poster.
Yeah,
The days of yore in the past.
to kind of bounce off of that as well, right? Bringing up the sort of adventures that they've gone on, right? So maybe one of your players is a paranoid dwarf who thinks that there are a subspecies of crow that lives in the ground, and he
Oddly
blames all of
specific.
his problems on ground crows. And they're a real, epidemic where he's from, and it's a huge deal, and it's terrible. And these ground crows, they steal your tools, and they fly out of the ground, and they're real nuisances. So maybe sometimes, hypothetically speaking, you send them on a mission to deal with a avian problem, and it turns out to be ground crows. So now all of a sudden, the dwarf player is over the moon because he was vindicated. He was right. And all the other players are like, oh yeah, I guess there are ground crows. Like, oh,
Another
huh.
other dwarven players just staunchly still believe it's BS.
Yeah, exactly. And then that's a fun back and forth between those players, right? Where he's like, it's the ground crows, and you're like, sure, Grandpa, let's get you to bed. Like whatever you say.
You
It
and them
doesn't
ground
matter if
crows
ground
again.
crows exist or not, right? At the end of the day, that doesn't mean anything.
Mm.
But what matters is that the fun interaction between your players.
Yeah. To move on to the next group on that one, which this kind of goes hand in hand. There is a group I call the Witness and the ones I call the Star. So the Witness is a weird name, but I've heard it phrased like that. So the Witness is the person who came to the game to hang out. They are not interested really in the game, but all their friends are playing, so they're just going to do this. And that kind of vary. The biggest pro there is they're easy. They just show up, and that's neat, and they're not really hurting anybody. The biggest con with that one is they're also showing up and they're here, but they're also not doing much.
This one is the hardest for me, to be honest. Out of all the ones that we have listed on this list, the Witness is the one that's hardest for me because I want all of my friends to be included, and I want them to be there to have fun, to have a good time. And I understand, like, sometimes real life chatter takes precedence over playing the game that we're all here to play, right?
Yeah.
There are more important things than tabletop role playing games. Surprising as that might be for some
Blasphemy.
people. I know.
Not in this house.
But it's so hard for me when, let's say, 5 people are here to do one activity, and one person is here to do that activity, but they are not necessarily invested in it. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with not being invested, right? We have the hack and slash players who show up and they just want combat. They don't care about the world. They don't care about the fine details. They're here to hit things with the greatsword or whatever. The Witness is hard for me because I feel like if we're doing a group activity, it is a little odd that you're just content to like be a part of it, but you have a foot half in and half out. That's really difficult for me, and it's a me problem for sure. And it's not that I mind the Witness being there, right? I want my friends to be included. I want them to have fun. I want them to come hang out because they obviously want to be a part of the group, but it doesn't feel like they're interested in what we're doing necessarily. I would love to get your guys' thoughts on that. It kind of feels, I guess, to me like if we're all sitting down to watch a movie and you're pulling out checkers, it's like there's a disconnect there for me at least.
No, I definitely agree with you there. Like a big reason why I GM is because I want to watch other players get involved. And the Witness kind of by their nature doesn't. And so it's really sort of upsetting to me, even though there's not a reason for it to be upsetting to me. Honestly, there's nothing wrong with hanging out with your friends. And so like basically I just found you just kind of got to accept that that's okay. They're just kind of here to watch.
My weird solution for that one is the crumb focus. You give them a moment where you're like, okay, I need you to make a decision for whatever. It doesn't have to be a very important decision, but it's something that shows that they are doing something here for that one. and you'll see sometimes if there's a witness and they can get overshadowed by certain very tactical players to be pushed into a corner. Like, I need you to flip this one switch. Well, at least you're flipping a switch. You're doing something on that. But you would have so the idea is to give them something to do, but don't make it very critical for what they need to do. The crux of the game should not rely on that person because they're not here to deal with this or the consequences thereafter. And that's the sort of my take for that one. It's like, if we have a combat situation, I ask you what you want to do for your turn, and suggest you can just attack them like a hack and slash, because it gives them something to do, but it's not critical for that. That's sort of the way I've always approached that sort of, other things on it. The only time, which honestly in any of my games, I'm fine with a witness in there. That's fine. I can deal with it. It's the ones who are so checked out that they end up that they end up ruining the game for everybody else. This is the kind of the person who comes in, yeah, I'm barely playing, but also I need everyone in this room to check out this meme right now and look at this thing that I'm doing right now for this one. Yeah, we're in the middle of a game. Save that for it. I also honestly don't care if people do stuff like that as long as it doesn't disturb the flow of the game. If the game can keep going, I'm cool with it.
That makes sense.
I had one player who literally spent 70% of their game of this RP game just on their phone playing playing a mobile game of some sort on there. But they didn't like bother anybody for that, and was at least focused enough that I can just point out, hey, it's your move, you need to do a thing, and they'd be like, okay, I'll just attack, I guess, or something. And which is fine because it doesn't bother everyone else. As long as it doesn't slow down everybody else who is here to play the game, I don't mind that. And giving them little nuggets so that way they are still included in one way is the best way that I personally have found to do it. Now, every game master has a different style or how they want to do it. I knew one person that would, if they knew someone who was the witness that was going to be there, they tried their best to not have them in the game at all. Which I think is rough and not necessary, but that's what they wanted to do because they wanted to make sure they could do just this game.
How about yourself, Dicey? Do you have any thoughts?
So I'm at a bit of a disadvantage on this particular one just because I do shorter games compared to I think the rest of you. But I tend to find witnesses are I find all players are witnesses at certain types if they fall heavily into one of these archetypes and it's not the on mode for that archetype. So I think there's always some element of, did you find the thing the player likes to do or is interested in doing? And it could get very niche, like maybe they're a rogue that their only thing they like doing is picking locks. It can be kind of tough if they're like really focused in on one thing or if they just don't know. But in general, my thing that I like to do with witnesses, especially if they're maybe people I know that I know going in are going to be maybe a bit kind of disconnected. They're new, maybe also new to the system. I like to make them the note taker. And like have them give session summaries if I can, because then that kind of gets them engaged in like okay, well, you get these things from the loot. Hey, would you mind taking the loot down for the group? And then the group gets them involved and their characters are more likely to interact, which is to help flesh out some of like what they like in the system. The other thing is I give them, I'm going to call it, I guess, the sacred object. So if there's a way to give them something that they have to hold that's important, like the torch, for example, or they have to carry, for whatever reason, this really magical, important sword that we need. We came into the dungeon for it. We can't leave. It's only stop screaming when you carry it. They have to now carry the magic sword. It just kind of gets them engaged in a way, um, where they have to be just a hair more involved. Like they could still kind of sit there, hang out, whether other people are doing something, but they have like a key object, I guess, and then they're still important, they're still involved. But I guess kind of to your point, Leo, it's not necessarily the make or break thing in all cases, although sometimes it is. That's kind of fun to spice that up a little bit. Gambler talking.
There's a roll on this.
But like giving them something specific to do is helpful, I find.
Mhm.
or giving them like a buddy, like if it's an escort quest or something, or the party splits up, throwing a couple different things at that group again to kind of see what will get them engaged. Because sometimes it's
Yeah.
just, some people are just personality wise, they just want to hang out. Other times they maybe aren't comfortable with the whole group. They don't feel
Mm,
comfortable RPing like with the whole group, or, they're just not sure where they slot in. And so I like to throw a little bit of stuff at them here and there, I guess is
mhm.
the crux of it. But again, I haven't had an experience with a long-term DMing for a long-term witness, so take that with a grain of salt for the longer campaign folks.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
I've done it on both sides for both modules and long campaigns where and so one shots. Actually had a witness on a one shot that was really odd, but that's how I ended up having to approach it, just to make sure that they felt involved, but also they were only here because their friend was here. And so that's sort of the witness in general. The opposite side of that is the star. This is the person who wants the game to be about them. They want to take the lead. They want to gasp at it. We've even talked about this before previously. When back when we did the live episode for at GSGC talking about other game types. One of them was the Buffy the Vampire Slayer RPG, which apparently one of the rules is one of you guys, one of the players gets to be the Slayer, the main character. Only one of you gets to do that. No one else.
Main
See, and I'm
character
kind of
energy.
okay with that. I don't.
Mhm.
I don't want to be the Slayer. Like, I mean, if no one else wants to, I'll step up and do it. I don't mind. But like, Giles is way cooler. Why would I not want to be Giles or like Xander? Like, why not?
Mhm. It was just such a weird system to read because I'm sitting there going, hang on. So one person, per the rules, gets so many extra stats than everybody else does just because they picked this person.
But I feel like you kind of have to have that happen, right? Especially in the Buffy the Vampire. Like, if you had a Buffy game with no Slayer, you're not playing Buffy. I don't think.
Mm.
No, you're playing Supernatural.
Yeah, literally yes.
Or Charmed.
Literally or Charmed. Yeah,
Yeah.
literally yes. Right. I mean, it's kind of like the Star Wars RPG a little bit, right? Where it's like, oh, I'm a mercenary. I fly a transport ship. I got piloting skills. Oh, I'm a rebel soldier. I'm out seeking vengeance on the Empire. And someone's like, I'm a Jedi. It's like, well, we know who's going to be doing some stuff, like no hate to the pilot, no hate to the, rebel soldier, but like, you don't have access to the mystical powers that allow you to choke somebody from across the room. You just don't.
Now, those are game mechanic wise, which is fine if that's the case, because you know that going in. The bigger problem with the stars is when it's not a game mechanic side and they are just wanting to, or steamrolling everybody else, or making every decision, or basically being the person in charge, because it's basically a one person playing this RPG and everyone else is just sort of here for that.
Yeah, and there's a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, I think, when you hear about that. They're like, no, obviously we don't want that. And bear in mind, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if you're running into someone who's a spotlight hog, it probably is a bad thing. But it isn't necessarily. If you've got a lot of people who are more on the witness side, who are really just here to kind of to watch other people, there's nothing wrong with having a star in your game who wants to play the main character and everyone else is along for the ride. If the party is down for that, your star's not a problem. It's when your party's not down for that you will start to run into problems.
Mm-hmm. That's ultimately the biggest crux of that whole thing. It's if the party's cool with this person being in charge all the time, fine. If they are, it's when they are making everybody else's decisions and they are not happy with being steamrolled for those decisions and such. I actually had a game once where I got a little annoyed because what will happen is that the player next to me was the guy in charge, and then the game master basically filled in my backstory for me for the events that I did during this game. I'm like, but I didn't want to decide that. No, you did, because that person did all these things. Like, oh no, that's not how that works. It's agency is your key thing. I think that's the important take on it. You don't want to lose all your agency for your players. You can have somebody who leads charge. Sometimes there's been fun campaigns where one person's in charge and we're all just backing them up, hoping for the best.
And I definitely think that, as the GM, we should be comfortable shifting the spotlight from person to person, right? Like the
Hmm.
star can be the face, they can be the main character, if you will. But that doesn't mean, I mean, even in like TV shows and books and other things, even the main characters of those are not always the focal point of the story, right? Sometimes it cuts to a different scene cross town where the main character isn't, and we get a little bit of backstory about you know whomever, whatever the pilot, I guess, in this example. Um, so I think that being able to shift that spotlight and going, okay, you've been doing a lot of talking, you've been doing a lot of the scenes, you've been doing a lot of the work. You know, we're gonna leave you there. We're gonna cut across town to Jim Bob, who's doing this. What do you do, Leo? What are you up to while this is happening across town? That would then give you, Leo, if you're a witness character, hypothetically, would give you
Hypothetically,
the ability to be like, oh, well, Jim Bob is going to go down to the dungeon and fight some rats or whatever.
hmm they're big rats.
It gives you some agency then to sort of not take the spotlight away from the star, but to sort of just kind of share space with
Yeah.
the star.
Like I said, the biggest problem with the star is agency in that they're taking if they start getting abusive to this, they start feeling like they're taking the agency away from the other players. The witnesses are on the other side. They don't want all that agency, but you want to get them involved in one way or another. They are a harder sell than the star.
Yep.
The star you can easily pull back the reins. It's hard to let somebody go because they don't know where to go at this point. That being said, the next two that I want to talk about, there is the rules lawyer. This is the person that the rules state that these are the things that are happening, and these are the rules that should be going. This is what's in the book, therefore it is the rules for that
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
There's a lot of pain in those mm-hms.
mm-hmm.
Yep, you can feel the pains.
Oh, good.
Nope.
Dicey.
You first.
I insist. I've talked a lot. I have been the star too long.
I was just gonna say I am the anti-rules lawyer as a DM.
We'll get to
so,
that guy in a bit.
I'm not gonna have a lot of good feedback here, but go ahead, Dane.
Guidelines. They are guidelines.
Guidelines.
All the rules are guidelines. Oh, plants are hurt by fire damage, to use a previous example. Props if you've stuck this long into this. Plants are, harmed by fire magic. Well, guess what? These plants are different. Suck it, rules lawyer. No, I don't want to be adversarial. I don't want to be an adversarial GM. I'm mostly talking in jest. But it is very difficult when we have spent time making this game for our friends, for these people, and it does feel like the rules lawyer is sort of working against cohesion a lot of the time in favor of keeping words on a page sacrosanct. And I understand why that is, because yes, without the rules, the game doesn't really exist, right? We're just all playing make-believe. There's nothing wrong with that. But without the rules being written down and being codified and meaning at least something, that's not a game. That's just us, I have a shield that blocks bullets. Well, I've got bullets that break your shield that blocks bullets. Well, I've got a laser beam that, you just one up each other, right? So for me, the rules lawyer is hard because I am going to use the rules until such a time as they do not suit what I am attempting to do. And then I'm going to yeet them as far as I can and not think a second thought about it. It says that you can only carry 100 arrows in your quiver. Do I think Legolas does that? Yeah, probably. But do I think Legolas fires probably a lot more than 100 arrows and we never see him reload his quiver? Absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. Sometimes he does run out of arrows, to be fair. But
it takes a while.
Yeah, and if encumbrance, or like how many times have you seen a movie or a TV show where somebody has a firearm and they fire like 47 shots out of a 9 bullet magazine, and you're like, I don't know that's accurate, but okay, but like, who cares?
Yeah,
it's cooler when somebody doesn't have to reload, or when they
Mhm.
don't have to reload until such a point as they do, and then it's like, oh, this tension moment, right? They
Mhm.
have the bad guy on their side and it clicks empty, and it's like, oh no, his 48th shot out of his 9-clip magazine, like, ah, dang it, if only he had had 48 shots in there. So I do have a hard time with rules lawyers because we're telling a story together, and at the end of the day, if you want to do it differently, then do it differently. If you're concerned about what the book says, and that is, well, by this logic, I can punch the sun. It's like, yeah, okay, fair enough, I guess. But like, to what end? What are we
Mhm.
doing with that? What does that even mean at the end of the day?
Now, understandable.
I
Now,
have a hard time.
that's fair. Now, I do see the benefit of a rules lawyer in some cases for it. Not hardcore rules lawyers. They got it. Like if they ease up, that's fine. So here's the thing: a nice rules lawyer will understand that they don't need to say this every time, but that also means that they have already, like in my case, when I was starting D&D 5e, uh, and I had 2 days to prep, and I have barely started reading 5e. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but everybody else does, and they can fact check with me, so I don't have to. I'm like, oh, you use Eldritch Blast, okay, so I need to roll. I don't know, whatever. You tell me what you roll. um, it's sort of a case of point, and it's again the issue with that one is more extremes. Hardcore rules lawyers will say that this is a fact on that. That this is a thing that happens. Um, One of my favorite movies is Dorkness Rises, which is totally about Dungeons and Dragons. There's a point in this game in the movie where the bard there, who is having a time throughout this movie, it is hilarious the mistakes that keep happening. He wants to stab an evil book, and when he wants to stab this evil book, he's like, I'm gonna stab it. All right, wait, I'm gonna backstab it. And the game master there's like, you can't backstab it. He goes, it's got a spine, doesn't it? Well, okay, technically, yeah, it's got a spine. So he goes to backstab it, which means he has to roll a dice. And so Rob had to explain the math to me because I was new to D&D at the time, and it's essentially because what happens is the bard actually stabs itself, like misses horribly, and it does like critical damage to himself too.
Scott
Um,
C. Brown is a delight. I was able to
the
do a
light.
panel with him at one point about storytelling, and he is a class act, honestly. And that movie is great. If you haven't seen, this isn't sponsored. I don't even know if they would do sponsors, but The
Mhm.
Gamers 2 Darkness Rising is, oh, it's so good.
It is super good. If you like tabletop, you will get the jokes that are in there.
Hashtag not a
Um,
sponsor.
it's not a sponsor, but I'll say this every time.
Unless.
Laws.
Unless.
Um, but the thing is that after the movie, Rob watched the movie. After that, because Rob's played more of that, he explains to me, okay. So I asked him about the spine joke, and he goes, "Well, so he's doing a backstab because it's a spine, but because he's asking for a backstab, has to roll the dice. If he didn't do that, he would just be able to. There's no need to roll a dice. It's an inanimate object. It's not moving. He just stabs it.
You just hit.
Yeah, but since he wants to backstab it, now he has to roll a dice. And since he has to roll a dice, he now has a chance to fail at that roll, which he does.
Um,
Hide behind the pile of dead bards. Sorry, Dicey.
you're fine. Uh, I was just gonna say one thing for my case, with doing modules and one shots is that
Mhm.
I've played with a lot of new players. I've played with a lot of new players, and having a friendly rules lawyer at the table can be really helpful. Like, particularly if someone doesn't understand something, they might feel more comfortable asking the person next to them, like, how do I read this? Which things should I attack with? And if they're a rules lawyer and min maxer, then they can be like, oh, you definitely got to go with like that Eldritch Blast. It'll definitely hit. You know what I mean? Stuff
Mhm.
like that. So they'll more likely to get a cool moment when they don't necessarily know everything yet. So rules lawyers can be really helpful in that way. And I do find that that's a great way if you've got a veteran player that's obviously a rules lawyer. A great way to get them engaged is be like, hey, this person is this, if you guys aren't sure or and I'm usually very clear of like I'm a little bit loosey goosey with some stuff, not the core, but if we think it'll be fun or it's not worth looking up, like vertical distance jumping, uh
Mhm.
we can D&D math that, and guess and roll it out. And so that's I think a good way to engage a rules lawyer positively. Or if you
Mhm.
have like a really crazy scenario, the gamblers come up with their grappling hook, and there's a pterodactyl flying around and they're trying to lasso it. They could maybe remember some obscure rules about animal handling combined with uh the X-wing tying up the giant walker,
Mhm.
and come up with an interesting way to do it. So collaboration can also be good too, as long as it's done with positive intent and like, hey, ultimately I think this is going to be the funnest for the table, as long as they're willing to also concede like, hey, that's the choice the DM's made, within reason, as long as again the DM's also not being like crazy OP about it. Unless
Mhm.
that's how they've said they'll run their table. You know,
Yeah.
collaboration.
I do think a positive rules lawyer can be very helpful. I just when I think of rules lawyering, I think of like an actually,
Oh
well,
No,
no.
I feel you.
actually,
As
mm,
as a resident rules lawyer, I
I know
I
you
got to tell you, I've
monster.
had more than a few cases where I've been that actually guy.
Well, it can be hard not to, right? Because you're an expert in this. You know what you're talking about. You know what the rules say, and that's huge. That's a lot of knowledge, and that's important and impactful, right?
Well, even more than that, honestly, the rules are kind of what allow me to understand the potential consequences for my actions. You
Sure.
know, if I want to try something and I don't know the rule for it, then I don't necessarily know what are the odds of success. And if
Sure.
the GM's just kind of making that up, pulling it, out of somewhere down south, then it can be hard for me to decide, do I want to do this or not, because now it's not up to like the numbers on my page. Now it's up to how does the GM feel.
Yeah.
And then I'm not dealing with some sort of an arbitrary system that is fair and balanced. Now I'm dealing with somebody who might not like me because I ate the last slice of pizza tonight.
Well, obviously
Twice a
disadvantage.
monster.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, bring your DM snacks. I
Yeah,
can't stress that
yeah.
high
That's
enough.
that's the key. That's the key thing for all these guys. Bring the DM snacks.
We are snack adjacent.
and like sometimes I'll be like, here's the DM, and they're like, okay, oh, you want to do this unusual thing? Okay. We don't have a rule for that, and I think we do have a rule for that. As a matter of fact, here it is, and the DM's just like, no, we're just gonna do it this other way, and that really bothers me. If
Mhm.
you're breaking a rule because you want a cool story thing to happen, like okay, here's the plants that are immune to fire. That's an interesting plot hook that we should look into. Why are these plants immune to fire? If you're making plants that are immune to fire because you don't want to deal with your fire mage, that's just going to tick me off.
I definitely think it goes into intent on that, right? Where,
Mhm.
for me, if I don't know the rule or if I'm not sure if a rule exists necessarily, right? It can be immersion breaking, and just as it is for you when there is a rule and they're just doing it off of vibes, right? I think it can be just as immersion breaking on the other side, where it's like, oh, hold on, everybody, I need to find subsection paragraph 3,
Mhm.
sentence 4, and describe to you why these are, but this sort of break up the immersion on that other side as well a little bit. So absolutely, like I think that they're if the DM is going to break rules for vibes, that's okay to a point, as long as they are being consistent with it, and as long as they are, for at least for me, upfront and open about being like, hey, look, I know that the rules say differently, but I'm choosing to do this intentionally,
Mhm.
right? Because they obviously have a little bit more knowledge about the world, probably, I would hope, than the players do, uh, and that sort of thing. So if they're doing it for a reason, even if it's a reason I don't know, I do feel more comfortable with that personally.
Yeah, I think MGM who's gonna like ignore rules, as long as you're upfront about it and you let me know ahead of time, I'm
Yeah,
probably
and I think
okay
that's
with
fair.
that.
Communication's huge.
Well, and even just discussing like, hey, if you do have a problem with me something, pushing to vibe mode, let's just plan for a way to discuss that constructively. Um,
Yes.
because that, you don't want to not, you don't want to also like lock out your rules lawyers either to a point. I will say one thing that, uh, based on what Rob was saying that I think is valuable. People tend, in general, in my experience, to know a lot about their one specific thing. So they're not necessarily a conventional rules lawyer, but they may know like
Mhm.
everything there is to know about gnomes. And to me, as someone that's never run a gnome, that is actually helpful to have a rules lawyer type person that's just gotten like super into their character type. They know everything about how warriors work. So their gnome warrior is like absolute fire. You know, them knowing the nuances of that class can actually be helpful to me. If that's not an area of expertise I have. So I do think there's also like niche rules lawyers that can be very, very helpful. The guy that's like the merfolk, like has gotten like a merfolk
Mhm.
type class that knows everything about swimming. I know very little about swimming combat. So,
No, I
like,
think I think that's very fair.
Although Dicey, I did love the warrior on fire. I'm like, man, fire comes up for Dicey a lot.
you don't even know. Dane, stop making that face. Dane is making faces for people listening to just the podcast and not the
I'm
audio,
gonna
not
I'm
the
gonna
visual.
say a quote out of context. I wonder what that field would look like on fire.
I
Just
just,
just out of context, just a quote. I don't know who said it. Somebody did though.
Look,
I'm
if you're
sure.
playing D&D for a lengthy amount of your life and you don't have a dozen stories that involve setting something on fire that should not be set on fire, you're doing it wrong. I'm sorry, but that's just
Statistically, you should get something on fire once.
That's fair.
To be fair, that quote may have come from not a D&D scenario and just life, and
Hypothetically, like a car ride, maybe somewhere.
yeah, and mostly curiosity about would they save the windmills if there was no one in there and the field caught on fire.
Like, yeah.
Stay away, intrusive thoughts. Stay away.
I will
Smokey the
say
Bear
too-
would really like to have a word with you.
He's approaching your location now. To kind of continue what Dicey was saying, right? There have been absolute times where, like, I, as a 5th edition GM, someone who's ran the game since about 2015, I do know quite a bit about 5th edition. I think that's a fair thing for me to claim. If you disagree, I don't know, at me or something. That's fine. We'll talk about it. But so I do think that there have been times where I've been at a table and I do have to remind myself. I do have to keep that in check. I am not a rules lawyer, I don't think, but it can be difficult when you see a friend who is less familiar with the system do something or make a ruling or like stutter on something where they're like, oh, a player asks, hey, can I do this? And as Rob mentioned earlier, like I know what the rule is, right? I'm able to help. I could be helpful, and that's where it comes from is a desire to be helpful. But there have been times where like I needed to remind myself when the GM has made a ruling, even before I've mentioned anything, that this isn't my table, right? I might do it one way at my table, but they have elected to do it a different way. Um, and as Dicey said as well, kind of bringing up a constructive way of being like, hey, you handled this fine, no problem, no issues whatsoever, great session. Just wanted to let you know there is a rule for grappling, or there is a rule for swimming combat, or what have you. But I didn't want to like interrupt because it is disruptive, I think, as a GM to be like, oh, swimming combat, roll an athletics check. And someone's like, well, technically it's this thing. And you're like, even if they're trying to be helpful, right? Even if they're not doing an annoying voice like I just did, even if they're trying to be helpful, it's still disruptive and does undermine, or at least to me, it seems to undermine the GM's power and authority just a little bit. Now, if they ask for help, of course, by all means, help them. Please, please help your GM's players if they ask for it. But I have been in that situation where like somebody's like, "Oh, roll an athletics check," and I'm like, "Oh, that's acrobatics, dog," and I have to remember like, "Oh, this isn't my game. Maybe they do it this way because they have their own reasons that I'm not privy to. Maybe I need to like stop being such a goddamn know-it-all and sit
Back off,
in
dude.
my lane a little bit, you know?"
Now, that being said, so that's the rules lawyer. The last sort of archetype I want to talk about and was nicknamed way back in the day the loony or the chaos guy or the lulz, basically. This is the person who does a weird thing because they think it's fun and funny.
Can be hilarious. Can be the most annoying player at the table.
Yep.
It can go either way.
It can go either way. It is either the funnest person to have at the table or the absolute worst person to have at the table.
I feel like that's the joke character that got too far and lived too long.
there is a quote from, I forgot who it was, but it was about a particular or thing. It goes, the thing about it came up when they were talking about reality show competitions. Sometimes the joke guy, the person that people vote for on as a joke wins.
Yeah, because they vote off all the strong contenders, and it's just the joke person left.
Oh, what was it? There was one Olympics where one person who was like the worst runner tripped, fell, but then everybody else met, and it was like the lowest time on this track, and it was running this track in a circle. Gets halfway through, and everyone else trips, falls, and crashes and burns, and so he ends up winning, technically a gold medal, and with the worst time.
I mean, technically speaking, the breakdancer at the 2024 Olympics
Yeah,
won a competition to be there.
yeah.
Whether or not they won it correctly, I'm not here to say, but they beat a number of people to be at the Olympics to deliver that performance. Is all I'll say.
But so here's the thing with that: the loonies, the crazy ones like that who want to do stuff because it's fun. Honestly, I say take it with a grain of salt is the best way to handle it. It's fun sometimes to let them do a wacky thing on there. I had a weapon, an item that was like a magic wand, and it was going to cast a spell on something, and I'm like, and they're like, okay, but you have to pick a spell from any of these things, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to pitch something to you. Can I have it shoot a pie? Why? Just cause. And at some boss, I threw a pie at their face. Hilarious to me, but useless for any other situation.
Unless they were allergic to berries.
Oh, I actually had a throw chart so I could roll for what because one of the curses it would randomly cast whatever pie I wanted. Today's pie is lemon meringue.
There's definitely some place for this type of archetype, right? It can be very fun to have them along. In a couple of ways, I have two Vampire the Masquerade stories. There was a game I was in where someone was playing a Malkavian. For those of you who don't know the Vampire the Masquerade system, Malkavians are they're cursed with visions of the future. And because they're cursed with visions of the future, most of them don't make any sense whatsoever. They mutter, they say things, they seem sort of ill in a lot of ways, even to other vampires, because they are cursed with these visions of the future. And so there was one dude who was, being kind of leaning into this trope, being especially unhinged, even for a Malkavian. And there's a thing called the Masquerade you're not supposed to break, because if the humans find out the vampires exist, they're going to murder all of us. They're going to do an inquisition, and the church is going to show up, and they're going to murder all of us, all of the vampires forever.
We have this here for a reason.
Yeah, we want to keep it hush-hush and keep it cool, keep it chill, whatever. So this player lands on the hood of a taxi cab and goes, blah, see, blah, I'm a vampire, and I've got frag grenades, and unpins them, throws them into this car, and blows this car up. There were some ramifications that happened from there. I had another player in a Vampire the Masquerade game playing a gangrel. When gangrel frenzy, when they lose control of their character, they have a chance to develop an animalistic trait. And because this character was kind of a zany guy, he was like, hey, can I just start picking up random animal traits? Is that okay? I was like, yeah, you can do that, but it's going to affect your ability to remain incognito, to not break the masquerade. And I told him up front that if eventually he got too loony, too zany, that we were going to have to maybe put his character down. Well, a toucan beak and eyes and claws and I think it was mole claws or something later, he unfortunately was taken off screen and dealt with because the person who ran the vampire city that he was in caught wind of him and was like, well, you are a walking masquerade violation and we can't have that, so off with your head. So it can be very fun, but I can absolutely see how if I were trying to tell a very serious vampire story and I had this Toucan Sam looking guy hanging out, would send a mixed message, right? Would be disruptive, would not be a fun time. But because the players and I were into it, it was a fun time having this strange creature.
I can just picture it right now. All right, we're at the dark and brooding moment of this. We need to plot away, for there's another clan out there that's going to disrupt and ruin the masquerade for all of us. Hey, yeah, what about Toucan over there? Shouldn't anybody check in on that guy?
Fruit Loops cereal.
I'm gonna see. He drew a picture of it, or he had a picture of it drawn. I don't remember which. I'll see if I can get a copy of it, and if he's cool with it, we'll put it in the video. If Leo,
If he's cool with it, I'll use it as the picture for the thumbnail for this. I'm like, this Toucan guy.
Player archetypes
yeah,
in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And I've said this before in the previous podcast about TTRPGs. If you let me know up front how zany I'm allowed to be, I will follow that rule. I played games where I'm super, super dark, serious, and I've played in one game where brooding was just the name of the game at this point. I got exhausted with it because I'm not naturally a brooding guy, but I'll do it. And then, complete Looney Tunes. I will pull a hammer out of hammer space. And what does that hammer do? It fires a pie at people. Because that's what this hammer is going to do.
To be honest, I generally like the Looney in my games because I so rarely run serious games. And so
Same.
I'm just going to get along with the Looney a lot better. But it is important to watch out and make sure that they don't totally disrupt your game, but it's important to recognize that they can be really helpful. The one thing you can depend on the Looney to do is make the game move.
That is true.
A long time ago, I remember I had this campaign that I was running with a bunch of people, and they just would not act. They had spent an entire session planning their next move that they were going to make. And then 2 weeks later, we came back and they wanted to keep planning. And it was so frustrating as a GM. It was like, come on, guys, please do something, do anything. And so I asked a person that I knew to be a bit of a loon, can you please join my game and make things happen? And by golly, things started happening.
It does kind of remind me of Hellsing Ultimate Abridged. There's a character called the Major. And in one of the episodes, shout out to them, not a sponsor, but God, it's such a funny show.
So good.
He's like, Sire, they know our plans. And he's like, oh, they only think they know our plans, but we've planned around their plans. But what if they've planned around our plans? Well, we've planned around their plans of planning around our plans who have planned around our plans. Your players just wanted to make sure that they were planning around the plans of the plans, But no, I absolutely agree. Like there are, and as a GM, you don't have to rely on the Looney to do this, though they are very helpful as mentioned, absolutely. You can also throw a beehive into the middle of that group and see what happens. Oh, there's two people carrying a huge potted urn and they're walking up to a second story location and it tips and falls over into the middle of your group. Roll for, dexterity or whatever. Roll to dodge. Don't be afraid, GMs out there, to also, like I said, throw a beehive into the middle of your players and just see what happens. You can throw that grenade and just watch. As long as you have a reason for it. Doesn't have to be a good reason.
There's no reason that says Toucan Sam Vampire can't be an NPC that comes in to ruin your player's day.
Yep.
Although, speaking of grenades, I actually ruined Rob's day. First day Rob was a GM. We were at my characters were at a medieval festival. Like, can I get a firework? Like, just a big old firework? And like how much? I don't know. Whatever the dynamite you can put in there. And so they packed this giant thing in, and then later in the game, our other two players were being attacked. And then I hopped in and I tossed this grenade, and it just Rob rolled for damage because he didn't expect me to use it, and I just panicked I don't know.
It wasn't a grenade; it was a firework. I didn't expect you to use it in combat.
Yeah, you didn't see that coming. it blew up, and it caused so much damage. I think you had to redo. I almost ruined the entire game by accident.
Wait, you took out 90% of the guy's health, and he was supposed to be a recurring boss.
Sometimes you give your players things that seem innocuous and turn out to not be very innocent at all. They turn out to be the worst possible thing for you ever in the world, and it's fine because you did this to you.
It's fine.
It
That's
was a
okay.
wake-up call as a GM that I think I needed in my early GMing days, but still.
For
Oh,
me,
man.
if we don't have a good, like, one of the things I like to throw at the loony is the Feywild. Because then you can kind of, like, embrace that need for chaos, but also, like, use it against them a little bit.
Especially
Just
if your Feywild's like Willy Wonka-esque, you know, where it's just like, yeah, chocolate rivers, ha, or whatever.
you're a giant
Mhm.
blueberry now because you ate that
Mhm.
blueberry. But I think that's a good way, just like some sort of element where they can kind of embrace that chaos. Maybe it's throwing the beehive in there and then they get to have fun with that, or the firework. You didn't know what they were going to do with it. You didn't expect what they were going to do with it, but now your recurring character is dead and his brother is now the recurring character.
So your main villain has died due to your own actions. Flip the chair around.
Um, One thing I will say is that I think kind of with all these archetypes, uh, tabletop RPGs are a buffet, right? You
Mhm.
you get the menu for the rules lawyer, you get the chef special that changes every day for the loony. You get the artisanal cheese made from local farmers for the lore guy. The role player can make their own sandwich. Hack and slash sashimi. You just want to make sure
Mhm.
everybody's fed at least a little bit. And who knows, they may
Oh
like
yeah.
something they weren't expecting.
I love this analogy, but I do have to ask: is the rules lawyer eating the menu?
No,
No, the
but they
rules
feel
has a menu.
they're comforted by the fact there is a menu.
Okay,
Mhm.
okay. Because
They know.
in my head it was like I was like cheese sandwich. Okay, yep, all making sense. All making sense. The rules like it's the menu, and I was like,
The rules lawyer wants to know what the special is.
Mhm.
It'll be listed
The
on the
gambler
menu.
will just order the special, not even look.
Yep.
Just whatever's happening that day.
No, but
Calories
I
for
mean,
the
and I
number
mean that's
cruncher.
true because
Yeah. Count- Nutrients for the number cruncher. Yeah, they love that.
no, but I mean it's true that your players might find out that they're one of these archetypes without even realizing it. It's
Mhm.
not uncommon for people to realize later that they enjoyed something that they thought they wouldn't. It's not unusual for somebody to change tastes over time. You might feel like the loony one session, and then the next session you just want to hack and slash something, and you don't
Yeah.
necessarily want to do anything all that crazy or wild. And maybe the next session you feel like I actually am curious about the backstory on that thing. I want to learn more about that.
Mhm.
That's
Well,
not
yeah,
unusual.
feel
We
free to
have these
experiment.
these categories to help us understand the world, but they're not necessarily like the most accurate depiction. Just kind of accept that, take everything that we've said here with a grain of salt, because people are people and they don't fit into boxes super well.
Well, I'll admit, right, when I started out on TTRPGs, and still now, right, when I enter a new TTRPG, I typically default to the idealized version of myself that I would want to be in that world, right?
Mhm.
Usually a strength-based character, usually melee focused, unless it's like a gun game. Um, because that's easy for me to put myself in that headspace of me, but me in cyberpunk, or me as a vampire, or me as whatever.
Mhm.
The first time that I'm trying a system, I will oftentimes just sort of make me because I want to see what I would do in those situations. I find that interesting, but it's as soon as that character or campaign is done, right? Chronicle, whatever you want to call it, that then I start playing different characters who are not like me. And that is where I have the most fun, right? Playing me is familiar. I'm me, I think.
Mhm.
Um, I'm pretty sure I'm me.
You think, therefore you am.
I do think, therefore I am. I don't know that you think, therefore I don't know that you are. But I assume you are, for what that's worth, listeners at
That's
home
okay. I
and
believe in
my
the you
fellow
that believes in
podcast.
me.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my god, I love Gurren. Why is there not a Gurren Lagann TTRPG?
Make one.
Oh god, I don't want to do either.
Oh, that would be. Yeesh.
It's like me with Cyberpunk. I want to play in a Cyberpunk game so freaking badly, but I do not want to be the person to run it.
Mm.
It's a problem, and it's me. I'm the problem. But no, like I think that so I basically start out as sort of like the role player because I'm playing the idealized version of myself,
Mhm.
and then eventually, right, like I get into other character archetypes that I like. Delinquent characters I think are really interesting in media, and that is not really all the time who I am, or I'll play, a different perspective of a different character. So I think to echo Rob's sentiment in terms of playing characters and playing roles and role playing in these games, you can start comfortable. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But don't be afraid to sort of branch out into these other archetypes. And even then, maybe one day you're a loony and one day you're a role player. Maybe you're both at the same time.
Mhm.
Who knows? That Malkavian I mentioned from earlier was role playing their character in the world.
Yeah,
They were also being ridiculous about it.
they
Both
could
can
do
be
two
true.
things.
Yeah. So
Or like how I started my games, as you heard from that story. First game I got to do at Rob's game, I was a loony, but now I really like to do a gambler. But probably the longest, and but at some point I usually end up being a role player at some point because I just want to be that role player, and you can switch it around. These archetypes are here to just sort of help you as a game master understand what kind of players that you have. They're not there as the hard and fast, or as the rules lawyer would want to enjoy it as the point of fact on that one.
ooh, yeah, the rules lawyers, Rob, how you doing, buddy? You might be having a hard time. You're like, you have to pick one. The rules say you have to be one.
I'm sorry, the rules say you're a hack and slash person. You can't try that crazy idea because that's just not who you are.
Dang it. Every time.
Well, and that's the other thing too is you'll see with group dynamics, if you see too much crazy, you may be like, nah, I'm gonna be the hack and slash in this one because I just don't want to deal with that. And you have to also make room for that as a DM. If you have a character person that's mostly one type of character, but they're in a scenario where they don't want to do that, don't like try to shoehorn them into that normal role for them either.
Mhm.
Let them play. Let them play.
I think we've gotten all these are all the major ones, and there are other sort of subclasses or other sort of nicknames for other types of players that are out there. But these are the ones that I was wanted to focus on because I think this gives a good general aspect of it all.
One archetype I'd like to just throw in there at the end, based on some comments I got in my chat recently. One other archetype is the forever DM, or the forever GM. So if you
Oh,
are a player, and this is directed more to people who are players, if you are a player and you see the DM or GM running stuff, and you really, you're not sure, you feel like it's a lot of responsibility, let me assure you, in most cases, your GM DM will be so excited to play. Just try. Like, they were really worried. The person who had brought it up in my chat was so worried about, not having enough experience, not feeling creative enough. And that's where I'm like, we have tools, we have modules, we have one shots. Like, just get in there. Because don't ever let a lack of experience stop you from DMing or GMing. And if you ever get a chance, aside from feeding your GM DM, uh run for him. Run for him. Like, you know, the most passionate DM I think would still love to play once in a while to flex the toucan vampire because they never get to do that. They've not found a way to shoehorn it into any of the stories yet. So just throwing that out there, like I think a DM archetype would also be a little bit of all of these, as
mhm.
well. So, but
You can actually get as a game master do this. I for one have game master. I will usually for a lot of different games just for one reason or another make a table because I'm a gambler type with my game master. So there's always a chance something weird might happen, but I need a chart to tell me what weird thing's going to happen because I need to know it will be there.
Yeah, I mean, kind of on Dicey's point too. Just having a DM as a player or a former DM or whatever is probably one of the best players you're going to experience because they know what you're going through. They're a lot less likely. It's not impossible, but they're less likely to disrupt your game on purpose. There's
Less likely.
Look,
I've
okay.
definitely never been guilty of intentionally ruining a friend's game just to see their reaction, maybe get them back for the crap they pulled in my game. No, that would never happen. But
If I'm gonna be unhinged, I'm gonna tell you about it. You know that.
I
Please
mean,
let
for
us
the most
play.
part,
Please.
a former GM is going to be like, oh, they're going to recognize, oh, he's struggling a little bit, and they might nudge the players a little bit for you. They might try and nudge the story into the direction they see you're going for. They might, do a thing that's going to help you out kind of surreptitiously.
Please let us play.
For sure. I mean, it's kind of like mods on Twitch. They're there to help you, but also they'll bully you a little bit too, so you get the full experience.
They're gonna make you drink 47 cups of water in a row because it fills their terrible hearts with glee.
Do it. Do it.
To that point, I am curious where we all think we fall. I know we've talked about this a little bit, but I'm still curious to my fellow streamers or podcasters, whatever we want to call us, and the audience. Where do you fall on these archetypes? Just to run through them really quickly. The new guy, we have the hack and slash. Oh, sorry. Is it no the pro and the con? I'm
No.
confused
New
by our own
guy,
notes.
the hack and
New guy,
slash,
hack and slash gambler,
the gambler.
number cruncher,
Mhm.
role player, lore diver, the witness, the star, the rules lawyer, the loony, and the DM. Forever DM.
So with that, I guess I'll start with that real quick. So if and I'll give you my player version and my game master version, which most of those are going to be the lawyer, is going to be the gambler the whole time. For that, I like chances. I like dice. I like to do the big move on there, and I will level with you. If I make a mistake, I will take full on responsibility that the fact that this happened. There's a famous game that I did with Zombie Hand, and I rolled a dice, and it says you eat the poison mushroom. It instantly killed me. It took me out. I died, and Zombie Hand's like after the game was like, "Oh, I'm sorry that you had to go." I go, "No, it's fine. It's fine. We'll do it again. We'll do it again." And that's because I will go. I'm like, I will go that crazy long shot route.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Dicey?
Oh, I made up of the same stuff for both roles, but I'm a combo of three because I can't be just one thing. The loony, the gambler, and what was the other one? Oh, the lore diver. I love lore so much in everything, so I just can't help myself. But I also like to be chaotic and take chances with stuff, so you'll see me come up with lore on the fly that becomes canon. I'm 100% that person that probably prepares a lot if it's self-made, but if it's not, I'll prepare enough and then just like let stuff kind of flow organically because that's just like where I like to live. I will say, as a DM, I am a little bit of the witness just because I like to watch. I like to watch and see what you guys do and come up with and how you like shape and change the world. So I would argue every DM is a little bit the witness because
Mm.
they want to see. If they didn't want to see you play in their world, it'd be a book.
True.
That's like the expression for it. If I didn't want to see what you would do, it's a book.
I feel like the DM is probably all of these at certain points.
Mm-hmm. No, in general,
Oh,
don't get
yeah.
me wrong. Like just because I have a flow chart or for if this dice is, I have a flow chart that I made so I know what pie I'm throwing you in the face for him. That doesn't mean I didn't put in the work to do a role player. I've done one for a specifically for a lore driver, and I like had 10 pages worth of backstory in the event that they went to this, because I knew the next stage of the place they're going to go to is going to have like libraries and secret facts and secret things like that way that it'll feed them with these crumbs. Yes, eat, enjoy my little lore. But I'm going to make you work for it. Lore divers like it when they have to work for that one.
Yeah, it's like gamblers. You can't give everyone everything all up front.
Mhm.
You have to breadcrumb it along the way for a lot of these archetypes. It's
First
not fun to
time-
win all the time.
Oh yeah.
And I agree that we're a little bit of everything. You have to be. It's just those are
Mhm.
where my skills lie.
Yeah.
In the
Oh, yeah.
least prepared attributes.
All right, Dicey, who do you want to pass this on to? You got Dane or
Rob.
I think so I'm a number cruncher. I like to make my characters, with cool synergies. I like to see what unusual things I can do with the system. I want to have my numbers be high, and sometimes I just want to have them be high in weird stuff because it's fun to see what kind of crazy builds you can build. So in that sense, I'm a little bit of the loony, but also a little bit of a rule slayer, because it's not fun to me if I make my cool character and ignore the rules. That, where's the fun in that? No, I need to make my cool character, and I did it within this rule set, within this little box that you gave me. I made something you weren't expecting.
that is a separate level of fun to have. Oh no, this character can do this destructive thing. Well, should they? Well, here's where I can figure out where you let me do this.
Yeah, as GM, I think I'm mostly a witness, but also I like to be a little bit of a loony. I want to see the look of shock on my player's face when something happens that they weren't expecting. My favorite moment as a DM was the moment a tank rolled up on my players and they weren't expecting that. The look on their faces was absolutely priceless.
I think we all worship at the altar of the twist.
Yeah. 100%.
That leaves Dane.
For me, I think I am a combination, as we all are, but of the role player, the lore diver, and a little sprinkling, a little salt bay of the star. Because for me, right, it feels awesome being the focal point of an arc. I don't want to be the focal point all the time. That's boring and tired. Once again, breadcrumb it. If you give me everything that I want up front, it's too much and it's not fun. But like, I want multiple moments where I feel badass or cool or impactful into the narrative, into the story as a player. And so that's where that star comes in. Lore diver, I love lore. I just do. And the role player, I think it's fun to get in and examine a role, whether it is my own in a fantasy setting or a different setting, or the role of somebody else who I am assuming for that game. I think it's very fun and very interesting to be able to play characters both like me and not like me. So I think that's probably, those three are probably where I fall in. I mean, it's me. It's all about me, obviously. This is my game. You're all just actors in it.
Hashtag all DMs.
I mean, yeah. I think as a DM, you have to be a bit of the star, right? Because you're making this, like, sure, you're making this for other people, but like, you want them to interact with it because it makes you feel good.
The world.
Because I'm the narrator of this tale.
Like, sure, I made the button and the situation that the button needs to be pressed in and the room that the button sits in, but you, the player, have to decide to hit the button. But if you do, oh, it's going to feel so good. It's going to be the best thing ever. Hit the button. Do it. Come on. Do it. Do it.
The world is the stage, and we're all just actors.
So that being said, I think this is a great place for us to wrap up on this. Now, with that, the next episode that's going to be available will be on November 15th. That being said, this is Gaming Theater Podcast logging out. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Gaming Theater Podcast is hosted, created, produced, and edited by Leo Garcia, the Geek Scorpio. Our music is A Drinking Game. Stock media provided by Stormwave Audio /Pond5. Our cover art is by Adam Parker. You can find him at ParkerGFX on Twitter. If you want to send us some money to help with these episodes, you can do so at patreon.com/gamingtheaterpresents. Want to send support that doesn't hit your wallet? Please leave a review with wherever you hear your podcasts and share our podcast with your friends. It really helps out. Thank you for listening.